I want to emphasize that every detail of this story is completely real. I've tried to include as much information as possible to show how serious the situation was. I'm 28 now, and this happened 3 years ago, when I was 25 and still thought company event just meant free food and awkward small talk. Our company rented out a big entertainment complex for the annual party, with bowling lanes on one side and pool tables and a bar on the other. My coworker Damon was 27. We were work friends, nothing more, and we'd planned to show up early with a few people from our department so we could grab good lanes before the place got crowded. We checked in, got rental shoes, and bowled our first game before most people even arrived. It was normal, stupid fun. Damon kept bragging about finally getting to beat management at something. When we finished that game, we were both a little sweaty and just wanted to sit. So we moved to the lounge area in the middle of the building, where there were low couches and small tables. From that spot, we could see the bar, the front doors, and most of the lanes, so it felt like an easy place for our teammates to find us while we waited. We dropped onto the couch with our sodas and started talking about work. I was complaining about a client. Damon was half venting, half joking about deadlines. Neither of us wanted to drink yet, with upper management floating around, so it really did just feel like an off-site meeting with music. At some point, while I was looking around the room, I noticed a man in a gray blazer standing alone at the bar, scrolling on his phone. I remember thinking he didn't look familiar, but the company had hired a lot of new people, so I didn't give it any real thought. After we'd been sitting there a while, Damon suddenly jabbed my arm with his elbow. It wasn't playful. It actually hurt. He kept his eyes past my shoulder and said under his breath, "Don't turn around fast, but that guy in the gray blazer has been staring over here for like 5 minutes." I thought he was messing with me. I kind of smiled and asked, "You sure he's not just zoning out?" Damon shook his head once, still watching. "No, he's not looking around. He keeps locking on us, even when we're not facing him," he said, and his tone was flat enough that I stopped joking. I tried to tell myself he was overreacting, but Damon isn't the paranoid type. I shifted like I was stretching my neck and let my eyes slide toward the bar. The man was just starting to turn his body away, like he'd been caught, but his phone was still up in front of his chest. The back of it was pointed straight at us. His thumb moved slowly over the screen, like he was scrolling, but the position didn't change. If I had taken a photo from where he was standing, our couch would have been right in the center of the frame. I turned back to Damon and kept my voice low. "Okay, that was not nothing. His phone was on us," I said. Damon leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, which let him watch without being obvious. Up close, the guy looked mid-40s, balding, average height, business casual, completely forgettable except for what he was doing. He took a few slow steps along the bar like he was just changing spots, then stopped near a column and stared down at his screen, tapping with his thumb. After a few seconds, he started moving back toward us, not even trying to hide it. The back of the phone pointed at our couch, while his eyes stayed on the screen. Instead of walking past, he chose a table yards away, sat down, and set the phone on a stand, angling it straight at us. I whispered, "Let's go," as Damon pulled out his keys, and the man finally looked up from the screen and made eye contact with me. His face twisted with annoyance for a moment, like he was irritated we'd caught him. He stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped, and he started walking straight toward us, with his eyes locked on mine. That was enough for me. I grabbed my bag, said, "We're leaving," and headed for the main doors. Damon didn't argue or ask what was going on. His footsteps were right behind me. As soon as we pushed into the hallway, I broke into a run. I heard Damon speeding up behind me, which just confirmed he'd seen the same thing I had. We shoved through the exit into the parking lot. Damon's car was close to the doors because he always parks near lights, and we sprinted straight for it. I yanked open the passenger door and dropped inside while Damon unlocked his side and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so hard I missed the seatbelt latch. Behind us, I heard the metal door bang open again. I turned and saw the man in the gray blazer come out at a fast walk that turned into a run as soon as he hit the pavement. He scanned the rows like he already knew we'd headed for a car. "Get down," Damon said, and dropped low behind the steering wheel. He hadn't started the engine yet. I slid down in my seat until my back was against the door and my knees were jammed under the glove box. It felt stupid to be hiding like kids, but the idea of him seeing us sit up and then blocking us in scared me more. Damon kept the keys in his hand but didn't turn them, probably thinking the engine or headlights would give us away. Through the lower edge of the window, I watched the man reach our row and slow down. He walked past the first cars, leaning in toward their windows, cupping his hands to see inside. He didn't look drunk or confused, or like some guy who'd made a mistake. He looked focused. He checked one car, then the next, moving steadily along. He got to Damon's car and paused so close I could see scuffs on his shoes. He shifted his weight and angled his head, like he was trying to see if anyone was on the floor. I stopped breathing. For a second I was sure he'd seen me, but someone yelled something near the entrance and he turned his head that way. After a short pause he moved on, still peering into cars, slower now, and finally reached the end of the lane. He crossed into the next row and did the same thing, working all the way down until he was out of sight. A couple minutes later, I heard the metal door again and saw his jacket as he went back inside. We stayed hunched down. Damon whispered that he wanted to wait and see if a car left the lot right away. My legs were already cramping, but I didn't argue. A few minutes later, I heard the door open again. This time he walked straight to a black sedan parked near the building, unlocked it, and got in. The engine started, and instead of driving out, he began rolling slowly through the lot. He went up one aisle and down the next, moving at walking speed, turning his head toward each row. When he turned down our lane, Damon whispered, "Don't move." I barely breathed. As the sedan passed our car, I forced myself to lift my eyes just enough to see the license plate. I repeated the numbers and letters in my head, over and over, too afraid to reach for my phone in case even that tiny movement caught his eye. He kept going, turned out of the lane, made one more slow loop, then finally headed for the exit and pulled out of the lot. We stayed down for a while even after his car disappeared. It felt long, even if it was probably only 10 minutes. Damon sat up first, checked all around us, then started the engine. I sat up slowly, my back stiff, and said the plate number out loud before it could slip away. Damon said it back to me a few times until we were both sure we had it. We sat there with the car idling, still angled toward the main building. Damon wanted to leave the property completely and go somewhere crowded, then maybe call later once we were away from the place. I kept thinking about walking back inside and telling security right away, but that meant going through the same doors he'd used, and I had this picture in my head of him waiting just inside. In the end, we compromised. Damon drove us to the far end of the shared lot, near another store that was still open, and parked facing the entertainment complex so we could watch. From there, it looked like a normal night. People laughed outside, some co-workers arrived, nobody looked worried. No staff were obviously searching for anyone. After about 20 minutes of watching the doors and checking the mirrors, Damon said our team had moved to a nearby restaurant and suggested we go there and calm down around people we knew. I was exhausted and still shaky, and said yes. Now, 3 years later, I know we should have reported him. To the venue, to the police, to someone who could at least log that plate number. At the time we told ourselves maybe we'd misunderstood, that it was overreacting to call the cops when nothing technically happened, even though both of us knew it wasn't innocent. I still remember how sure he looked, how comfortable he seemed stalking through that parking lot and then circling us in his car. and I think about how somebody like that doesn't do it just once. I still catch myself wondering who he was, whether there were others involved, and what would have happened if he'd actually caught up to us. I work as a nurse on the night shift at the hospital and usually get home around 7 in the morning. I'm 28, and by that time I'm running more on caffeine and habit than actual thought. That Tuesday started like any other shift. I gave report, grabbed my bag, and walked out to the quiet employee lot thinking only about my bed. When I started my car, the gas light dinged on, and I remember just staring at it for a second, exhausted. There's a station on the edge of town I always use after nights, cheap and usually empty around 7 in the morning. I pulled in, parked at a pump, sat there rubbing my eyes, then finally forced myself out into the cold September air. I was still in navy scrub pants with my badge clipped to my top, thin jacket half-zipped against the chill. I swiped my card, stuck the nozzle in, hit pay at pump, and while the tank started filling, I decided I needed coffee. I do this all the time. The pumps sit right in front of the glass windows, so I can see my car from inside. Inside, the place was dead. Just humming coolers, and one bored cashier behind the counter scrolling on his phone. He glanced up when he noticed my scrubs, gave me a quick, "Hey, night shift?" And I just nodded and grabbed a big cup. I filled it with whatever coffee looked least burnt, tossed in creamer, snagged a pack of cookies, paid, and headed back out. My car was still sitting at the pump, hose in, no one else around except now an older dark green sedan at the next pump. Its engine was running and a man sat in the driver's seat. He wasn't getting out or reaching for the pump, just looking my way. I tried to act normal, walked around the back of my car, saw the pump had already clicked off, and put my coffee on the roof. I hung the nozzle back up, hit no receipt, and the whole time I could feel him still staring, not moving, hands low on the wheel. I told myself I was being paranoid, opened my door, got in, and immediately hit the lock button so all 4 doors clicked. Only then did I glance over. He was closer than I'd thought, cap pulled low, eyes on me, no smile or nod, just flat. I put the car in drive and pulled away, telling myself again that it was the only exit, and of course he was leaving too. I turned right onto the main road toward my neighborhood, trying to relax my shoulders while the early traffic started to build. When I checked my rear view again, the green sedan was behind me, 2 cars back in the same lane, keeping pace. I muttered, "Okay, coincidence." But at the next light, instead of going straight like usual, I signaled last second and turned onto a side street. I almost never use that street. It just loops back around and adds time, and there's no real reason for anyone else to cut through there. In the mirror, I watched his turn signal blink, and the sedan followed me onto the same narrow road without hesitating. My heart rate jumped the way I usually see on my patient's monitors, but I forced myself to breathe slow and keep driving. I took another pointless right, then a left that pushed me back toward downtown instead of home, and he stayed behind me the whole time. By then, I'd decided 2 things. I was not letting this stranger learn where I live, and I wasn't stopping on some empty side street. Downtown at least has traffic, lights, and people, so I merged back onto the main road through town, keeping just under the speed limit. The sedan merged too, holding that same careful distance, like he'd chosen a spot and was determined not to lose it. My hands were sweating on the wheel, and I did the breathing I coach anxious families through, in through the nose, out slowly. I called my friend Emily, voice shaking, and told her everything fast. She woke up and said, "Do not go home, come here now." I reached her place with his car behind. She yanked me inside and locked. Emily still had her hand on the deadbolt when we went to the front window. We both crouched a little to the side so we wouldn't be obvious. The dark green sedan rolled slowly past her driveway, like he was just sightseeing, then braked a few houses down and parked at the curb. We watched the driver's door open. The guy who stepped out looked about 50, average height, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't go to any door. He just stood there on the sidewalk, turned straight toward Emily's house, and stared. I felt my stomach drop. Emily whispered, "Okay, that's not normal," and grabbed her phone again. While she was giving the dispatcher our address and explaining that he'd followed me from the gas station and was now outside, we saw him reach into his pocket, take out his phone, and start typing. He'd look down at the screen, then lift his head and look right at the house again, like he was comparing something. Emily repeated to the dispatcher that he was still outside, that he wasn't visiting anyone, and asked them to hurry. I heard the woman on the line say she was sending a unit and to stay inside with the doors locked. We backed away from the window but stayed where we could still see him from the side. My hands were shaking again, and I kept rubbing my badge on my scrub top because I didn't know what else to do. For a minute, it seemed like he might leave. He walked back to the sedan and got in, and I thought that was it. But he just sat in the driver's seat with the engine running. The car didn't move. Time felt slow, but it was probably less than 10 minutes before we saw a patrol car turn into the street and roll up behind his sedan. 2 officers got out, one older, one younger. They didn't rush him, which actually made it feel more serious. They walked up on either side of his window. We saw the guy roll it down and start talking, hands tight on the wheel. The conversation went on longer than I expected. He pulled out his wallet, passed them something, reached into his glove box, and handed over another paper. At one point, he glanced past them toward Emily's house again, and one of the officers followed his gaze exactly. After about 5 minutes, they stepped away from his car and headed up the walkway toward Emily's front door. She looked at me and asked, "You ready?" And I nodded, even though I felt a little dizzy. She opened the door but kept the chain on at first. They showed their badges. She took the chain off, and we stepped out onto the porch with them. The older officer did most of the talking. He asked me to walk through everything from the gas station to now, so I told him the whole thing, including the extra turns and me avoiding my house on purpose. He listened, asked what time I'd left work, how long I'd been at the station, if the man had spoken to me at all. When I finished, he sighed and said, "Okay. Here's what he's telling us. He says he's looking for his sister's place. Says she lives somewhere in this neighborhood and he got turned around, claims he left the gas station around the same time as you and just ended up behind you because he was going the same way." I remember just staring at him and saying, "He followed me through 3 pointless turns." The officer nodded slowly like he'd already thought the same thing. He added, "His story doesn't really line up, but that's what he's going with." Part of me wanted them to drag the guy out of the car and arrest him right then, but I knew it didn't work like that. The officer explained that they'd checked his license and registration, and both came back clean. No warrants, no prior complaints we could see from the car computer. The man had an address in another part of town, nothing near Emily's street or mine. On paper, he was just a middle-aged guy driving around too early in the morning. Then the officer said the one thing that stuck with me most. "He's nervous, and the way he talks about following you doesn't make sense." We told him if he's seen circling this area again without a clear reason, it's going to be treated as stalking, and he can be charged. He knows we have his information. Behind him, I saw the sedan finally signal and pull away from the curb while the second officer watched, writing something on a notepad. They didn't leave right away. They stayed in front of Emily's house for another 10 minutes or so, talking with us, asking if he'd said anything to me at the station, if I'd noticed the car before that, if I'd had any other weird encounters lately. I kept shaking my head. I told them I work nights. I go straight home. I don't go looking for problems. Eventually, the older officer looked at me and said, "We don't want you driving alone right now. If you're comfortable going home, we'll escort you." That sounded a lot better than crashing on Emily's couch and worrying all day about whether that guy had seen my plate and could track my address. Somehow I also needed my meds and some clothes for my next shift. So we decided to go back to my place with the officers behind us. Emily insisted on riding with me instead of letting me drive alone, which I was grateful for, even if I didn't say it out loud. A few minutes later, we were back in my car. I sat for a second with my hands on the wheel, watching their patrol car in the mirror. When I pulled away from the curb, they pulled out right behind us. I kept my eyes moving between the road and all the side streets, half expecting to see that dark green sedan again, but it never showed up. The drive to my apartment felt longer than usual, but nothing happened. We pulled into my lot, and I saw the patrol car swing in too, headlights sweeping the parked cars. The officers got out first, checked around the building, looked between the rows of vehicles, and even walked over to the dumpster area. They came back and said there was no sign of the sedan or anyone hanging around Emily, and I went up to my door while they waited at the bottom of the stairs. I unlocked the apartment, flipped on the light, and did a quick walkthrough, even though I knew logically no one could have beaten us there. After that, the officers said to call right away if I saw the green sedan near my building or Emily's again, and then they finally left. Emily stayed with me the rest of the day. I showered, took something for the headache that had been building since the gas station, and crashed on my bed while she answered a few work emails from her laptop at my kitchen table. By the time I woke up, the sun was already going down, and I had several missed texts from my mom and coworkers. But I kept the story short because I didn't want them to worry more than they already do about my night shifts. Since that morning, I just don't take chances anymore. I never stop at that gas station, even if it means driving farther, and I check my mirrors more than I probably should leaving work. That man has never appeared again, at least not that I've noticed. But every time I see a dark green sedan in traffic, my chest tightens and I watch it until it turns off, or I do. So for the context, I had been renting a desk at this co-working space called The Hive on Madison Street for about a year and a half. It was pretty much perfect for freelance work, quiet zones, fast internet, little coffee shop downstairs. I usually rolled in after lunch, around 2, grabbed a latte if I wasn't broke that week, then parked myself at the same desk by the window in the open space and chipped away at client projects till evening. People there mostly minded their own business. You'd get the occasional chat at the coffee machine, but nobody was weird, just normal tech people, writers, designers like me. Last Thursday, I came in like always. Bad habit of checking my phone all the way up in the elevator, then cutting through the main hallway straight to my spot. I dropped my backpack, opened the laptop, plugged in my headphones. For the first 20 minutes, it was just the usual typing and clicking, background hum of other keyboards. Then I noticed a guy, maybe around 40, settling at a desk across from me, maybe 15 feet away. Gray suit, neat haircut, tablet, a thick folder of documents. He looked like some consultant or lawyer trying to look casual in a co-working space. At first, I barely registered him. People float in and out all the time at the Hive. You stop tracking new faces after a while. But when I leaned back to stretch my neck, I suddenly realized he wasn't looking at his tablet at all. He was looking straight at me. Our eyes met, and he smiled and gave this small nod like we knew each other from somewhere. I did that polite half-smile back, but in my head, I was going through my mental list of regulars and ex-clients and drawing a blank I had never seen him before. I nodded once out of basic politeness and turned back to my screen, trying to refocus on a logo I was building for a cafe client. I told myself he was just being friendly. Co-working spaces attract extroverts sometimes. About half an hour later, my focus was gone and my back hurt. So I pushed my chair back and stood up to stretch my legs. I headed to the little kitchen to get some water. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape. When I glanced over, he was standing too, even though he had a full mug of coffee sitting untouched by his laptop, and he started walking in the same direction. In the kitchen area, he came right up next to me at the water cooler, closer than I thought was normal given there was open space. "You're here a lot, right?" he said, like we'd already talked before. "I've seen you around many times." His voice was calm, kind of practiced, like he used it on clients. I knew all the long-timers at least by face, and he wasn't one of them. Still, I just said, "Yeah, most weekdays," filled my glass, gave him a quick polite smile. He tried to keep it going, asked what I did. I said, "Graphic design, mostly branding." And then I used the classic exit and added, "Anyway, deadline," and walked back to my desk. For the next 2 hours, I could feel his eyes on me without even looking up. I kept my headphones in, but I wasn't really hearing the playlist, just staring at vector shapes and pretending to work. Every time I lifted my head, even for a second, his posture didn't change much, but his face was angled toward me. Sometimes he'd glance down and write something in a small notebook next to the folder, then look back up. It wasn't outright staring, no aggressive expression, but it was constant enough that my shoulders stayed tense. Around 5, I decided to take a bathroom break and clear my head. I saved my work, took off the headphones, and walked down the hallway past the glass meeting rooms. When I came out of the restroom a couple of minutes later, he was standing by the big window in the corridor, like he just happened to be there. He turned as I stepped out, and that same smile appeared again, only wider this time, teeth showing. It was too big for the situation, like he was acting in a commercial or something. Nothing about it fit the neutral co-working vibe. Something in my stomach dropped. I mumbled a quick, "Excuse me," and went straight back to my desk, suddenly very aware of how my backpack with my laptop, tablet, and hard drive was just sitting there. I started packing up right away, telling myself I'd just finished the logo at home. It wasn't like I'd never left early before. I closed everything down, shoved my gear into the bag, did a quick double check that I hadn't left my sketchbook or charger, and put on my jacket even though I didn't really need it. I didn't look over to see if he was watching again. I walked out of the open space at a normal pace, forced myself not to rush, then took the stairs down to the lobby. I could feel my pulse in my throat the whole way, but I kept my face neutral when I passed the receptionist. Outside, the air felt colder than it had when I'd gone in. I turned right toward the side street, then cut around the corner heading for the small parking lot behind a neighboring building where I usually left my car. That walk is 1 block, maybe a minute, tops. About halfway down the block, I glanced over my shoulder. The man from upstairs was on the sidewalk behind me, far enough back that it could almost be coincidence, maybe 30 meters or so. He didn't have his tablet anymore, just that same folder in one hand. That told me he hadn't just finished work and headed out randomly. He'd left most of his stuff upstairs and followed. I turned back around and picked up my pace a little. Not enough to be obvious, just enough that my footsteps got quicker. After a couple of seconds, I heard his get quicker too. I reached the parking lot and hit the unlock button on my key fob before I was even through the gate. My hands were shaking when I grabbed the door handle. I slid into the driver's seat, threw my backpack onto the passenger side, and started the engine faster than I usually would. While the car idled, I checked the rearview mirror. He was standing at the edge of the lot now, just inside the opening, holding his phone up. He slowly panned it across my car, then focused on the license plate, then the back of the car like he was documenting every detail. I watched him tap the screen a few times, taking multiple shots that snapped me out of the frozen feeling. I pulled out of the space, turned toward the exit, and drove past him without making eye contact, watching him only in the mirror. My heart was pounding the whole drive home, and the whole time I kept trying to come up with some reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd confused me with a previous coworker. Maybe he was some weird but harmless client doing due diligence. When I finally got to my apartment, I locked the door, dropped my bag, and just paced the living room for almost 2 hours, replaying every second and telling myself it had to be a mistake, that I was overreacting. I tried to believe that story hard enough to sleep, but that night my sleep was awful. The next day I went to the Hive at my usual time, trying to convince myself I'd overreacted, and it had just been some weird one-off thing. I checked in, nodded to Ashley, and went straight to my usual desk by the window. I opened my laptop, put my headphones next to me but didn't put them on, and started a fresh branding project, forcing my brain onto color palettes and fonts instead of what had happened in the parking lot. After about 40 minutes, the room felt normal again. People were talking quietly, someone was on a call, and for a minute I almost forgot about him. Then I heard a chair drag across the floor in front of me. I looked up and my stomach just dropped. Same gray suit, same folder under his arm, same neutral expression. He walked to the exact same desk across from me and sat down, like this was his regular spot too. He set the folder down, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. Instead of putting it away, he placed it on the table, screen up, and turned it slightly so it faced my direction. On the screen was a photo of my car in that back parking lot from the day before. He tapped the screen and slowly swiped. Close-up of my license plate, swipe. Wider shot of the back of the car, swipe. Side angle, swipe. Front angle. He wasn't pretending to be busy. He was clearly showing them to me. His eyes kept flicking from the phone to my face, checking that I was seeing all of it. When our eyes finally met, he held the phone still and smiled. This time it wasn't friendly at all. It was cold, almost smug, like he wanted me to know he'd done his homework and could show up in my life whenever he felt like it. I could feel sweat running down my back even though I was just sitting there. I shut my laptop, slid it into my bag, stood up as calmly as I could manage, and walked straight out of the open space toward the front desk. I didn't look back at him. I didn't want to give him more eye contact than I already had. Ashley was at the desk, scrolling through something on her screen. She looked up when I got close and immediately frowned. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked. I put my bag down because my hand was shaking and told her, in one breath, that there was a man in the open area who had followed me out yesterday, taken photos of my car, and was now showing those photos to me on his phone. I pointed past the glass wall toward where he was sitting, told her he was in a gray suit, around 40, with a folder. She leaned to the side, spotted him, and her whole expression hardened. "Stay here," she said, and walked toward him with that controlled, professional walk I watched from the desk. I couldn't hear much, just her asking him to show his member card or guest pass. He started patting his pockets, opening his folder, talking fast, clearly trying to come up with something. Even from a distance, I could see him trying that same fake pleasant smile. But Ashley didn't smile back. She just waited. After a minute, she pointed toward the exit. He paused, then picked up his folder and phone and headed for the door. Right before he stepped out, he turned and stared straight at me through the glass. No expression, just that flat, cold look, like he was memorizing my face one more time. Then he pushed the door open and left. Ashley came back and told me he wasn't in their system and hadn't checked in as a guest. She said people sometimes sneak into co-working spaces to use the internet, but what I described wasn't normal behavior at all. She suggested I go to the police and at least make a report. I just stared at the desk and said, "What do I even tell them? That some guy took pictures of my car in a public parking lot and looked at me weird?" She didn't argue, just nodded slowly and said, "Okay. Then at least let us document it." She wrote everything down, added his description and what he'd done to their internal blacklist, and said that if he ever tried to come back, security would call the police. I stayed and tried to work after that, but it was pointless. Every time the door opened, I looked up. Every time someone in a blazer walked by, my shoulders tensed. Still, for the next 2 weeks I kept going back, partly because I didn't want to feel like I'd been chased out, partly because my home internet kept cutting out and I had deadlines. But I never really relaxed again. I checked every new person who walked into the open space, scanned suits automatically, and found myself watching reflections in the glass instead of focusing on my screen. After about 2 weeks of that, I realized I was barely getting anything done. One afternoon, I just stopped midway through a layout, closed my laptop, and walked to the front desk. I asked Ashley how to cancel my membership. She looked at me for a second, like she already knew why, then told me to send an email to the manager. That night I moved my work setup home and sent the cancellation notice. I told myself that at least in my apartment I controlled who could be near me. Roughly a month later, Ashley texted me. She wrote, "Hey, just so you know, that guy came back today. Security recognized him from our note and didn't let him in. We called non-emergency and filed a report." I stared at that message for a long time. It helped to know they'd taken it seriously, but it also meant he hadn't just forgotten about the place. Since then, I've worked only from home, turned down offers to share offices with friends, and tried to move on. But whenever I'm driving, especially at night or pulling out of a lot, I still find myself checking the mirror over and over, watching the cars behind me and counting how many are gray. And I still sometimes check if there's a gray car behind mine on the road. So for the context, I've been running in the mornings for years now. It's just how I start my day. Up before work, quick stretch, and out the door while most people are still asleep. I live in the city. But there's a pretty big park about 15 minutes away, and it's got a bunch of paths that wind through a wooded part. Most people stick to the wide paved loop by the water. It's lit, you're always in sight of someone, and it feels safer. I know that. But I always like the dirt trails deeper and no bikes flying past your elbow, no kids, not many people at all. Over time I ran them so often I could have done half of them with my eyes closed. I knew which corner got muddy, which rock I always had to hop over. Because of that, I got relaxed about it. Maybe too relaxed. I run alone, no headphones, phone in an armband, keys tucked into my sports bra. I leave around 6, get my few kilometers in, go home, shower, work. Same routine for years. I'd had the odd, uncomfortable moment with a guy staring or matching my pace for a minute, but nothing that made me feel like I had to stop going there. That June morning, I decided to change my route a bit and ran down a trail I hadn't explored before. At the fork, my usual path went left toward the lake like it always did. The other one cut right and looked narrower, more closed in. I actually slowed down and stared at it for a second. My watch said I had some time, and I remember thinking it was stupid to keep running the exact same loop forever. If something ever blocked my normal path, I'd want to know my options. That was the little safety speech I gave myself before I turned right. This trail felt different right away. The dirt was uneven, broken up with more roots, and the bushes along the edges brushed my shins. It wasn't overgrown exactly, just less used. I shortened my stride, watched my footing more carefully, and kept going. I told myself if it got too sketchy, I'd just turn around and jog back the way I came. After maybe 10 minutes, the trees opened up, and I came into a small clearing I'd never seen before. Broken stone blocks were scattered around. some stacked like the remains of a low wall, some half swallowed by the ground. It looked like what was left of an old pavilion or something small like that. No benches, no trash cans, no sign explaining it. Just this random ruined circle in the middle of the park. I slowed to a walk and did a little turn, just taking it in. It bothered me a bit that I'd never noticed it on the park map or from any of the other trails. I'd run here for years, and somehow this place had been sitting 10 minutes away the whole time. For some reason, that thought made me want a picture, like proof it was real, and not just something I'd half dreamed on a sleepy morning run. I took my phone out of my pocket, stepped closer to the stones, and snapped 2 quick photos. I almost sent one to my friend who also runs there, with some "look what I found" message, but I decided I'd do it later. My knees were starting to cool down from the pause and I didn't want to get stiff, so I slid the phone back and turned to jog out of the clearing. That's when it happened. My shoe caught on a root that was sticking just high enough out of the dirt to hook the toe. I didn't even see it. 1 second I was stepping forward, the next my foot stopped and my body didn't. I tried to catch myself, threw my hands out, but my momentum was already gone. I went straight down onto both knees and my palms. It hurt, that sharp hot shock that makes your eyes water for a second. But it wasn't like I heard anything crack. I stayed there half on all fours, breathing hard, feeling the sting spread out from my knees. I could feel where my tights had ripped open. My first reaction wasn't even fear, just embarrassment, like someone had watched me do something stupid. I shifted my weight back and sat on the dirt, pulled one leg up to check the damaged skin scraped, a little blood starting to show. Nothing serious. My heart was still racing from the run and from the fall. The clearing felt very quiet. I could still hear the faint hum of traffic way off on the far side of the park. But out there where I was, it was just my breathing. In that exact quiet moment, I heard a whistle. 2 short notes, 1 long. It was sharp and clean, not like a bird. It sounded like the exact pattern people use when they're calling a dog or trying to get someone's attention from across a street. It came from my left, past the stones, deeper into the trees. I went completely still. I waited for the follow-up noises that always come with people. Steps on gravel, branches moving, a dog shaking its collar. Nothing. Just that whistle hanging in my head and this sudden cold rush of adrenaline that had nothing to do with exercise. Then it sounded again. Same pattern. But this time, it felt like it came from the opposite side of the clearing, behind me. I twisted around on the ground, scanning the tree line, expecting to see someone in a hoodie or bright running jacket half hidden behind a trunk. There was nobody. No movement at all. And then I heard a man's voice. Close enough that it didn't sound like it was far back in the woods, but I still couldn't see where it came from. The tone was light, almost amused, like he was cracking a joke with a friend. "Gotta be more careful," he said. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was had watched me fall and waited long enough to make a comment about it. Something about that felt worse than the actual trip. I planted my hands on the ground, pushed myself back up to my feet, ignored the fresh throb from my knees, and forced my voice to come out steady and loud. "Who's there?" I called. No one answered me. My own voice just dropped into the trees and vanished. I stood there for a couple of seconds, breathing too fast, waiting for some movement, some stupid laugh. Anything. Nothing. It almost felt like I'd imagined the whole thing, except my ears were still ringing with the exact way he'd said those words. I took a few slow steps toward the side where I thought the voice had come from, into the thicker trees. I don't even know what I thought I was doing. Maybe I expected to see some guy with a dog, or a person out for a walk who would step out and say, "Sorry, didn't mean to freak you out." But after maybe 3 steps I just stopped. My whole body went tight, like every instinct I had suddenly hit the brakes. That was the moment it really sank in how wrong this was. Who stands in the woods at dawn, close enough to see someone fall, whistles at them, talks to them, and still doesn't show themselves? If it was just some normal person, they'd wave, or apologize, or at least move so I could see them. He was choosing not to. He wanted to be unseen. The more I thought about that, the more exposed I felt in that open patch of ground. My knees burned, my palms stung, and all I could think about was getting back to where there were other people. I turned away from the trees and the voice, back toward the narrow trail I'd come from, and started jogging. At first, I tried to keep it at a normal pace, like I was fine, like I wasn't rattled. That lasted maybe 10 seconds. I got that feeling between my shoulder blades, like a pressure, like eyes on my back. I sped up without even deciding to. The trail felt narrower, closer. Every rustle I heard sounded like someone taking a step. I didn't actually hear footsteps behind me. No branches snapping, no leaves shifting, no breathing. But I could not shake the sense that someone was walking just far enough back that I wouldn't see them if I turned around too fast. I told myself it was just adrenaline from the fall, from being embarrassed, from being surprised. I still kept glancing over my shoulder every few moments. Every time, the same empty trail. Bushes. Trees. No one. Going back felt longer than going in. I recognized the bend where earlier I'd thought, if this gets sketchy, I'll turn around here. And passing it going the other way felt like a tiny bit of relief. When I finally saw the lighter strip of the main path through the trees and a couple of runners moving along it, my chest loosened a little. I pushed out onto the main trail and blended in like nothing had happened. The weird part was, the feeling didn't disappear just because I wasn't alone anymore. I stayed closer than usual to other people, drifting near a pair of older women walking and talking, close enough that I could hear them discussing something boring about their grandkids. That normal noise felt like a barrier between me and whatever had just happened. I kept running, but my rhythm was gone. I was hyper-focused on any sound from behind, on any set of footsteps that stayed right at the same distance for too long. If someone came up to pass me without calling out first, my whole body jerked. I ended the run early, cut off my usual loop, and went straight home. At home, the sense of being watched still clung to me. I locked my door, showered, then came back and checked it again. I checked every window latch, even on the higher floor. That day I went around the apartment twice, touching each lock and making sure it was actually fully turned. It didn't really calm me down. It just gave me something to do with the nervous energy. Over the next few mornings, when my alarm went off, I lay there a little longer than usual. Running used to be automatic, but now I thought about the voice, about that whistle, about how he never stepped out where I could see him. I still went out, because I didn't want to let fear take one of the only things that actually keeps me sane, but I changed my route. I stayed on the main paved paths by the water, where there were always other people, and you were never really out of sight. I started paying more attention to everyone around me. I noticed jackets, shoes, height, haircuts. If someone seemed to be circling the same way I was for too long, I slowed down or sped up or stopped to retie a shoe until they were far ahead. I never took that side trail again. I didn't even look toward it when I passed the turnoff. I just kept my eyes straight ahead. In my head, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some weird guy messing around, someone who thought it was funny to scare a random runner. Maybe he was on something. Maybe he wasn't dangerous at all, just creepy. But every time I remembered it, what stuck with me wasn't what he said. It was the way he stayed hidden on purpose. The deliberate whistle. The amused tone, like he was enjoying the fact that I couldn't see him. I still think about it now when I run through that park, especially if I go a little earlier than usual, or if there are fewer people out. I'll be on a perfectly normal stretch of path, and suddenly get hit with that same tight feeling between my shoulders, like someone is lining me up in their sights. And there's always this thought, quiet, but there. What if he's still there, deep in the woods, watching runners and waiting for someone to trip again? So, when I was 28, I was working as a bartender at a popular cocktail bar in Austin for 3 years. I did mostly nights, double shifts on weekends, the usual grind. After a while, the crowd blurred together, bachelorette parties, finance bros, first dates. Only the true regulars stayed in my head because they made my job easier. Janet was one of those regulars. Mid-40s, always in business clothes, nothing flashy, always neat. Every Tuesday and Thursday she came in around 8, took the same stool near the end of the bar, and ordered a vodka martini, extra dry. Sometimes she'd read, sometimes she'd be on her laptop, always quiet. We had the standard exchange. "How's your night?" "Good, thanks." And then I left her alone. She never hit on me, never tried to keep me talking. From a bartender's point of view, she was ideal. Predictable, polite, low effort. The last Friday of June was packed. Some convention had let out, and by 10 the bar was shoulder to shoulder, drinks backed up, printers screaming tickets. I was in full autopilot mode when I glanced up and saw Janet come through the door. That instantly felt off. I had never seen her on a Friday in 3 years, and it was already close to 11. She went straight to her usual stool like it was reserved. When I finally fought my way down there, she just said, "Vodka martini, please." No smile, no small talk. I made it, dropped it, kept moving. A few minutes later, she raised her hand again and ordered another one, right away. That was new. Normally she'd make one martini last an hour. I noticed her fingers trembling slightly when she picked up the glass, but I chalked it up to stress. People came in wound tight all the time. I had no reason to think this was anything different. Around 1 in the morning, the rush thinned. We turned the music down, did last call. People started closing out. I was wiping the bar when I realized Janet was still there. Laptop put away, glass empty, just staring at the bottles like she was miles away. When she caught me looking, she curled her finger for me to come over. I figured she wanted water or her check. I walked over and asked, "You good, Janet? Need anything else before we close?" She looked at me very directly, more focused than I'd ever seen her, and said, "I want to tell you something. I've been watching you for a while." That phrasing put me on edge immediately. There were only a few customers left. My bar back had the rest handled, so I said, "Okay, go ahead." She took a breath and said she'd been watching me for about 18 months. Not just as a customer. On purpose. I thought she meant she'd noticed my work ethic or whatever. Then she started adding details. She told me she worked in the office building across the street, on an upper floor, and could see the bar's front door from her window. She knew what time I usually showed up because she'd watch me unlock the door before my shift. She said she'd changed her route home so she could walk past the bar and check if I was outside on a smoke break or talking to anyone. She said it calmly, like she was explaining a scheduling trick. Then she said she knew where I lived. One morning she'd seen me come out of an apartment building on 6th Street, recognized me, and later drove by a few times to confirm it was really my place. She told me she knew I had a sister because she'd overheard me on the phone talking about watching my niece. She knew I was in evening law school because she'd seen my case books on the bar during slow nights and looked up the titles when she got home. She laid all of this out like a presentation, like she expected me to be impressed. After that, she smiled and said, "You see, we're clearly connected. I think we're meant for each other. I'd like to take you to dinner and talk about our future. Somewhere quiet, just us. She said, "Our future," like it was already a thing. My stomach flipped. I kept my voice level because I was at work, but I felt exposed in a way I really didn't like. I told her, as politely as I could, that I wasn't interested in any relationship with her, and that following my routines, memorizing my schedule, and tracking where I lived was not okay. I said her behavior made me uncomfortable, and it needed to stop. She shook her head and said, "I just don't understand yet that we had so much in common. We were both disciplined, focused, serious, liked quiet places." She added that she'd recently divorced, that she was finally free for a real relationship, and that she was willing to wait until I was ready. She kept talking like this was some mutual plan, and I was just behind. I repeated myself, more firmly. I told her I did not want any kind of relationship, that I wanted her to stop watching me and to stop coming to the bar. I said it calmly but very clear. That's when she got offended. Her whole expression hardened. She called me ungrateful, said I had no idea how much time she'd put into me, that she'd wasted her time caring about someone who couldn't recognize what he had. Then she grabbed her bag, pushed her stool in, and walked straight out. As soon as she was gone, I went to my manager and told him everything, in detail, because I didn't want it to turn into some twisted story later. He listened, got serious, and said if Janet came back and acted like that again, we'd cut her off, ask her to leave, and involve security if we had to. He told me to let him know if I ever saw her lingering outside after close. Walking home, I kept replaying the conversation and realizing how easily someone can build an entire fantasy around you without you noticing. For the next few weeks, I also changed my routes to and from work. Janet never came back to the bar after that night. For the first couple weeks, I kept expecting her to walk through the door at 8 on Tuesday like nothing had happened. She never did. Part of me started wondering if I'd made it bigger in my head than it really was, if she just had some midlife crisis moment and then snapped out of it. I still found myself checking the front windows more than before, though, and on smoke breaks I'd scan the sidewalk and the cars along the curb, just to make sure she wasn't standing out there watching. About a month later, on one of my days off, I drove home from the store and pulled into the lot by my apartment complex. It was late afternoon, still bright enough to see faces in cars. I noticed a dark sedan parked facing the main entrance to my building, engine running. People waited there all the time for friends or food delivery, so at first I didn't care. I parked a few spaces away, got out, popped my trunk, and happened to look over again. That's when I saw her. Janet was behind the wheel, both hands on it, staring straight at the entry door of my building like she was waiting for someone to walk out. My first instinct was to convince myself it wasn't her. I slowed down and pretended to rearrange the bags in my trunk, using the lid as cover so I could stare a little longer. It was definitely her. Same short haircut, same glasses, same serious office look. She didn't look around, didn't check her phone, didn't even look at me. It felt like I wasn't there. The only thing she cared about was that door. That's when it stopped feeling like some awkward crush and started feeling like she was doing surveillance. I closed the trunk like nothing was wrong, got back into my car, locked the doors, and backed out of the spot instead of walking to the building. My heart was racing so hard it made my hands shake on the steering wheel. I pulled out of the lot, turned the corner so she couldn't see me, and parked on a side street. From there, I called the police. I told the dispatcher there was a woman who had fixated on me, that she'd tracked where I lived and was now sitting in a car watching my building. The dispatcher sounded calm, said an officer would drive through and check it out. A patrol car passed my street about 10 minutes later and turned into my lot. I couldn't see the sedan from where I was. A few minutes after that, the officer called my cell. He said there was no vehicle matching what I'd described. Whoever it was had left before he got there. He met me out front a little later. I pulled up, showed my ID, and quickly walked him through what had happened at the bar. And that night with the martinis, I even pulled up an old picture from our security feed on my phone where you could clearly see her at the counter. He was respectful but straightforward. Since she hadn't threatened me, hadn't approached my door, hadn't tried to touch me, there wasn't much they could do right then beyond documenting it. He said if she came back, or if she tried to talk to me outside work, I should call immediately and consider filing for a restraining order. That night I told my manager everything and looped in a couple co-workers, including Carol, another bartender who'd been around for some of Janet's regular nights. Management put it in the incident log and told everyone on staff that if Janet ever came in and acted weird or tried to corner me, they were fine with refusing service and calling the cops. Nobody made jokes or brushed it off, which honestly helped, but there was still this feeling that unless she crossed some clear line, we were stuck just being aware. 3 months later, my lease was up, and I decided to move to a different neighborhood. Officially, it was because the new place was cheaper and closer to campus, and that was true. But Janet sitting in that lot was the thing that kept me from renewing. I didn't like the idea that she might know exactly which door I used every night. After I moved, I still caught myself checking parked cars on my street when I came home, trying to see if any drivers looked too interested in my building. And I kept replaying old shifts in my head, trying to remember how many times she'd been paying closer attention than I realized. Now I'm a lot more careful about what I share at work. I don't talk about my exact street, or what nights I have class, or when I'm off. And if someone keeps digging for that kind of information, I shut it down or walk away to another task. I pay attention to who always takes the same seat with a clear view of my station, who lingers after closing, who seems more focused on me than on their drink or their friends. Most customers are fine, but I don't treat regular as automatic safety anymore. The part that still bothers me isn't even that Janet said she was meant for me. It's how much she picked up just by watching and listening while I thought I was just doing my job. She knew my sister's name, my niece's age, my law class nights, the building I walked out of on 6th, and she never had to break a law to learn any of it. Carol later admitted she'd seen Janet staring at me longer than normal but assumed it was harmless and didn't want to embarrass me by pointing it out. And that's what sticks with me now, that all of us saw little pieces and decided not to make a problem out of it until it had already gone way too far. The only thing I had time to think when I saw the license plates was, that's a different state, 1,000 miles from here. But I'll get to that. I'd been working nights as a guard on a big construction site, recently hired. Job was simple. Patrol every hour, check the fence and gates, make sure nobody slipped in to steal anything. My shift was 10 at night to 6 in the morning. Most nights I was alone, which suited me fine. I listened to podcasts and sometimes read between rounds. The place was huge. A few unfinished buildings, cranes parked, stacks of materials, and a row of temporary trailers for the workers. Daytime was chaos. At night it looked frozen. That night it was midweek, cool, nothing unusual on the cameras. Around midnight I grabbed my flashlight, zipped my jacket, and went out for the next patrol. It was quiet, just my boots on the gravel and the wind on the metal. I walked along the far building, the biggest one, checking each access gate, tugging on the chains out of habit. All locked. I was half planning breakfast in my head when I saw it, light in one of the worker trailers. At first I thought it was a reflection. I stopped and watched. No, it was a flashlight beam moving around inside. That wasn't right. The crews clocked out around 6, and if anyone was supposed to stay late or come back, they let me know. I stood there a few seconds, trying to think of a harmless explanation. Maybe a foreman forgot paperwork, or someone from management dropped by. I didn't like walking up on unknown people alone, but that was the job. and calling the cops right away seemed like too much. So I headed over. I took my flashlight out and started toward the trailer. Not rushing, but not slow. Radio clipped on my chest. When I got to around 40 meters, the door opened. A tall guy stepped out in dark clothes, hood up, big shoulders, a large bag slung across his body. One look, and I knew he wasn't one of ours. I stopped. "Security," I called. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" My voice sounded too loud. He stopped too, turned toward me and just stared. No answer. No sorry, no excuse. We stood like that for a few seconds. Then he started walking in my direction. Not running, but fast, like he'd decided something. The way he moved, head a little down, completely silent, set off every alarm bell. I didn't have a gun, just the flashlight, and the radio company rules were clear. Don't play hero, call the police if there's trouble. I raised the radio so he could see it and said loud, "Stop right there, I'm calling the police right now." He didn't stop. If anything, he sped up, steps getting longer until it was almost a jog. My chest tightened. I backed toward the nearest heavy machinery, a bulldozer. Put something solid between us, that was the plan. If he turned and walked off, fine. Instead, when I moved toward the dozer, he adjusted too, like he was tracking me, not leaving. I cut around one side of the machine. He came around the other, matching me. The space between us shrank fast, maybe 20 meters now. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Whoever he was, he wanted to get to me. Next to the bulldozer, leaning on the track, was a heavy metal pry bar. I grabbed it with both hands and lifted it in front of me. "Stop! I'll hit you if you come closer," I yelled. My throat felt dry, but it came out loud. He didn't slow down. His face pulled into this small, crooked smile that made my skin crawl. As he closed the distance, he started muttering to himself. Low and fast, I couldn't tell if it was swearing or laughing. Just steady noise. When he stepped around the corner of the bulldozer and came fully into my light, I saw his hands clearly, covered in some kind of dark liquid or grime. He stopped about 30 feet from me and looked at the bar in my hands. We just stared at each other. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer. My heart pounded and my fingers hurt from how tight I was gripping the metal, but I didn't move, and neither did he. Then he started backing up. Slow steps, not turning around, just easing away while watching me. I kept the bar up and the flashlight on him. When he got farther out, maybe 40 meters, he suddenly turned and walked off fast toward the far side of the perimeter, where the fence met the trees I didn't follow. I tracked him with the beam until he went behind one of the unfinished buildings and disappeared. As soon as he was out of sight, everything hit me at once. I ran to the guard shack with the bar still in my hands. Inside, I locked the door and set the bar by my chair. Then I called 911. I said I was a night guard, that a man had broken into the construction site, confronted me, and gone toward the back fence. I gave the address and a quick description. They said officers were on the way and told me to stay inside and watch the property I watched from the window. As about 10 minutes later, I saw a car moving along the far edge near the tree line, headlights off, rolling toward the dirt road to the highway. When it passed under one of the yard lights, I saw the plates for a second. They were from another state. Then the car was gone. The police arrived about 20 minutes after my call. They parked by the gate, stepped out, and I met them outside, leaving the bar in the shack. I told them everything. We went to the worker trailer where I'd seen the flashlight. Up close, the damage was obvious. The padlock was torn off, the latch bent. Inside, drawers were open, toolboxes dumped, tools scattered. He had been searching for something. On the floor near the bench lay a big adjustable wrench. It was greasy, and had dried dark stains that looked like old blood. One officer put on gloves, picked it up, and asked if it belonged to the site. I said it probably did, but I couldn't be sure. They checked the rest of the area. At the back, by the tree line, they found a piece of fence that had been cut with cutters, then pushed aside. The dirt there was disturbed, and faint tire marks led toward the same road where I'd seen the car. Back at the shack, they took my statement. I described the man. Tall, broad, dark clothes, big bag, hands covered in something dark. I told them about the car with the out-of-state plates. They said they'd file everything and that patrol units would keep an eye out. By morning, my supervisor showed up. I walked him through it again. He wasn't happy the fence had been that easy to cut, or that I'd been alone with someone like that. Later, we got word that nights would have 2 guards, and the company ordered fence repairs and more lighting along the back. I still don't know who that man was, what was on his hands or on that wrench, or what he would have done if he'd caught me. I think about those plates, and wonder if he drove all that way for something on our site, or if we were just a random target. I don't know, and I probably never will, but I'm glad I had that crowbar. I work as a flight attendant for White Space Airlines. Been doing short routes for 8 years now, usually 4 flights a week. On Tuesday, my supervisor Liz called me in the morning, said Gretchen got sick and needed a replacement for Flight 247 to Tampa, departure at 6 p.m. overtime. I said yes without thinking too hard, hung up, threw my phone on the bed and started packing my overnight bag. My uniform was clean and pressed, so I changed, tied my hair back, checked my ID badge out of habit, then drove to the airport the usual way again. Crew registration was routine. Sign in, scan the badge, answer the same health questions, grab the tiny slip, and tuck it behind the plastic. Steve the captain and Michael the other attendant were waiting, so we did a quick catch-up, checked the passenger list, and walked to the gate together. The plane was a Boeing 737, about 150 seats, with the manifest showing around 120 passengers for the evening leg. We walked the cabin, opened compartments, counted life vests, checked oxygen bottles and medical kit seals, made sure the galley carts and jump seats were ready again. Passengers boarded in waves while I stood at the door, smiling, checking passes, pointing them left or right, grabbing heavy carry-ons before someone pulled a muscle. The last to board was a middle-aged man in a dark suit, pale and sweaty, clutching a briefcase on his way to business class. Once inside, he ignored the overhead bins and slid the briefcase under the seat in front of him, then sat down harder than most people do. He buckled his belt, leaned his head against the window, closed his eyes and stayed that way while we wrapped up boarding and briefing. Once the seatbelt sign went off, I set up the cart and started drink service from the front. When I reached his row, he opened his eyes fast and ordered a double whiskey in a flat voice. He drained it, wanted more. I checked if he was okay. He nodded. After I finished the cabin, I parked the cart, did a quick check for call lights, then went up to the cockpit and knocked. Steve opened, asked how things looked, and I said everyone was fine except one business class guy, pale, tense, and already on strong drinks in row 2. Steve just nodded, told me to keep an eye on him, then closed the door so they could focus on the instruments again. I went back down the aisle, checking seatbelts, picking up cups, answering a couple of requests, and every pass by his row he sat rigid, gripping the armrests and staring out the window silently. About an hour before landing, I saw him unbuckle, stand up slowly, and start walking toward the front lavatory, one hand trailing along seat backs for balance. He moved unsteady, went in, locked the door, and less than a minute later I heard him vomiting hard, then water running inside. He came out maybe 5 minutes later, even paler, eyes red like he'd been straining, sweat beading along his forehead. I stepped toward him, asked softly if he wanted water or medical attention, and he shook his head fast, muttered that he was fine, then fell back into his seat. I went to the galley and told Michael what I'd seen, the vomiting and how shaken he looked walking back from the bathroom. Michael walked up a minute later, crouched beside his seat and asked if everything was okay. The man said he'd gotten airsick, that it would pass soon. Michael asked his name for the report, and the man answered, "Ronald Higgins," without opening his eyes for long. Back in the galley, Michael scribbled it down and quietly told me we should keep watching him, and, if he worsened before landing, call for medics to meet the aircraft there. I nodded and went back to work as we started descending, walking the aisle to lock tray tables, straighten seats, and remind people to fasten belts. Ronald sat eyes closed, breathing, hands on his knees until touchdown. He left last. I said goodbye. He nodded and walked into Jet Bridge. Michael and I stayed overnight at the airport hotel. Nothing fancy, just the usual crew place 5 minutes from the terminal. We ate a quick dinner at the lobby bar, went over the manifest for the morning leg, and then split to our rooms because we had an early showtime. I remember sleeping light, waking up twice to check my phone, even though there were no new messages and no schedule changes. By 7:30 we were back in uniform and walking through staff security again. Same routine I'd done hundreds of times. New aircraft, new flight number, different crowd heading back. Everything looked normal. We did our checks, joked a little with the new captain, boarded passengers, and took off at 10 on the dot. The flight itself was uneventful. I barely thought about the night before or the nervous businessman from row 2. 2 hours later, we touched down, taxied in, and started the usual arrival dance. Passengers stood up too early. I reminded them to stay seated. People pushed overhead bins. All normal. After the last passenger left, we did the cabin walk, signed the paperwork, and I went through crew registration to clock out. I was already thinking about getting coffee on my way to the parking lot when I saw the police. 2 uniformed officers were standing near the terminal exit, talking to an airport staff member. One of them looked straight at me, then at my badge, and stepped forward. He asked my name, and when I gave it, his expression didn't change much, but he asked me to come with him to answer a few questions about yesterday's flight. My stomach dropped. I asked what happened, if there'd been some kind of complaint or incident report I'd missed. He just said, "Ma'am, they'll explain everything in the office," and walked beside me while the other officer followed a step behind. They led me through a service hallway to a small security office I'd never been inside before. A man in a suit was sitting at the table with a folder in front of him. He stood up, shook my hand, introduced himself as Detective Johnson with the city police, then asked me to sit. He opened the folder and asked if I'd been working Whitespace Flight 247 to Tampa the previous evening. I confirmed it, told him I was lead cabin crew on that leg. Then he asked if I remembered a passenger named Ronald Higgins. The name by itself didn't mean much, but when he added business class, middle seat, dark suit, I nodded and told him about the air sickness, the whiskey, the bathroom trip. Johnson listened without interrupting, took a few notes, then slid a glossy photo out of the folder and turned it toward me. It was Ronald, face down on a hotel room carpet, blood pooled around his head, hair matted dark. The angle showed enough of his profile that there was no mistake. I felt nausea hit me hard and looked away, hand over my mouth for a second. The detective said Ronald had been found dead in a Tampa hotel room shortly after midnight, single blow to the back of the head with something heavy, probably metal, according to the preliminary report. His wallet and phone were missing. No credit cards, no ID on him when they found the body. He said they were working it as a homicide and needed everything I could remember from the flight and after landing. I ended up sitting in that office for around 2 hours, going over every step of the flight in order. I told Johnson about Ronald boarding last, how pale he looked, the double whiskey, the way he gripped the armrests, how unsteady he'd been walking to the bathroom. He kept circling back, asking if Ronald had talked to anyone, argued with anyone, made any strange calls that I might have overheard. He asked if I'd noticed anyone watching him, anyone who seemed focused on him more than normal. I said I hadn't, that from my point of view, the rest of the cabin had been routine. Later, Johnson told us what they'd pieced together from airport and hotel records. Cameras showed Ronald leaving the plane behind the other passengers, walking alone through the terminal, then getting into a taxi at the curb. The driver confirmed he dropped him at the Harbor Inn near the airport. Hotel cameras recorded him walking through the lobby, checking in, taking the elevator up to his floor. According to Johnson, that was the last clear footage they had. Around 10 that night, someone knocked on Ronald's door. A guest in a nearby room remembered hearing the knock and the door open, then nothing else. The hallway cameras on that floor had been out of order that day, waiting on replacement parts, so there was no video of who came or went. In the morning, the maid used the master key when he didn't answer and found him exactly like in the photo. They pulled the passenger list from our flight, checked everyone, cross-referenced hotel bookings and rental cars. Nobody from the plane had checked into that hotel. Nobody showed any connection to Ronald. The case stalled and was moved into the cold case files. 4 years have passed since that flight, and I still think about Ronald more than makes sense. I replay his white knuckles on the armrests, the way he stared out the window and knocked back that whiskey like he needed it just to get off the plane. I keep wondering if he recognized someone on board and stayed quiet, or if it was just a random knock on a hotel door that ended his life for a phone and a wallet. I'll never know. But that uneasy feeling I had standing next to his seat has never really gone away. Back in August 2019, me and 3 friends decided to explore an abandoned meatpacking plant on the edge of our town in Ohio. I'm Kira. I was 19 then, 24 now, and this is one of those things I still think about way more than I want to. It was me, my older sister Martha, her boyfriend Ethan, and my friend Alex. We weren't thrill seekers or anything. Ethan just had this tiny YouTube channel about urban exploring, and he wouldn't shut up about how perfect this place would be for views. We picked a Friday around 7 in the evening, when it was still light but the sun was dropping. Martha parked her old Corolla in an almost empty shopping center a block away, so nobody would see a random car right by the plant and call the cops. The walk over felt more dumb than scary. Ethan kept joking about us being today's missing teens, and Martha kept telling him to shut up and stop manifesting it. Alex was quiet, hands in his hoodie pocket, watching the street like he was on security duty or something. We cut behind the plant through weeds and busted pallets and came to the back wall. One of the windows was already smashed out, glass mostly gone, just the metal frame. Ethan climbed in first, of course, narrating like we were already filming. Martha followed. Then Alex boosted me up and I slid through after them. Inside, it smelled like wet drywall and rust. The air felt heavy, like a basement that never dries. We all took our phones out and turned on the flashlights. Ethan started recording right away, talking in this fake deep voice about America's forgotten industry. I stayed close behind him. You hear too many stories about people falling through old floors or stepping on nails. I remember thinking that if anything went wrong, the last thing I wanted was to be alone in some random room screaming for help nobody would hear. The first floor was old conveyor belts and metal tables lined up in rows. Meat hooks still hung from rails in the ceiling, some of them slowly turning, which didn't make sense because there was no breeze. A couple refrigerator rooms had their doors propped open, white walls peeling, dark stains on the floor that I told myself were just oil. Trash was everywhere. Bottles, fast food wrappers, spray paint cans, A couple used needles on a crate that made Alex swear and step away. "People definitely still come here," he muttered. "This isn't just abandoned. "That's why it's good," Ethan said. "Layers of history. Real cinematic." Martha had wandered a little ahead. She called us over, holding up this old black and white photo she'd pulled off a bulletin board. A bunch of workers in hairnets and coats stood shoulder to shoulder, arms folded, staring straight at the camera. Someone had come back years later and drawn devil horns and X's over some of the faces in red marker. Martha laughed and said it was creepy in a fun way. For some reason it just made my skin crawl, like we were looking at people who never really left. We found a narrow metal staircase and headed up to the second floor. Every step groaned under our weight and echoed up and down the shaft. I grabbed the railing and kept thinking about how long it had been since anyone inspected this place. Ethan walked last so he could film all of us going up. Talking about possible collapse like that would be great for the video. The second floor had been offices, you could tell by the desks pushed against the walls and rolling chairs tipped over. Papers were everywhere, old forms and invoices mashed into gray piles. In one room, someone had already busted open a safe. The door was twisted and hanging off, nothing inside but dust. "See? Told you we missed the gold by like 15 years, Ethan said. Alex didn't laugh. He kept glancing back toward the stairwell, then down the hall. At one point he said, "Can we not stay too long? This feels off." And Martha told him he was being dramatic, but she also moved closer to him after that. I wasn't exactly relaxed either, but I blamed it on the smell and how quiet everything was. At the end of the hallway, there was a wide opening into what looked like the old cafeteria tables were flipped over. Plastic trays and cups scattered on the floor. Faded posters about hand washing and safety rules were still taped crooked on one wall. I was about to joke that the food here was probably worse than our high schools when we all heard it at the same time. Voices. Men. Downstairs. We stopped moving. It wasn't echo or wind. It was clear talking, a couple of guys, and loud laughing like they weren't trying to hide at all. Ethan snapped his flashlight off and hissed, "Phones off!" And we all followed. The room dropped into this dim gray light from the dirty windows. I could still see everyone as outlines, but that was it. The voices were getting closer to the staircase we'd just used. We heard metal steps clanging, slow and heavy, like whoever it was didn't care who heard them. Alex's hand found mine in the dark and squeezed hard. Then he pointed with his chin toward a door at the far end of the cafeteria that I honestly hadn't noticed until that second. We moved as quietly as we could, trying not to kick anything. Ethan felt along the wall until his hand hit the knob. He turned it and eased the door open. Behind it was a narrow service staircase going down, steeper than the other one. No railing on one side, just wall and darkness. We slipped through and closed the door gently behind us. The sounds from upstairs turned muffled. Ethan whispered, "Stay on the wall side," and started down first. The steps were thin metal strips bolted to the frame, creaking louder than the other stairs. I kept one hand on the wall, one on the rail, and tried to breathe quietly. But my heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was in my throat. Halfway down, we heard a shout from the floor we just left. A man's voice, angry and close. "Hey, somebody's been up here. Look at this." Another voice answered, too muffled to catch. And then we heard fast footsteps on the metal stairs. We sped up. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a low hallway with concrete walls and a row of doors on both sides. It was darker down there, colder. Ethan didn't turn his flashlight back on, just raised his phone brightness a little so we had this weak glow in front of us. From above, the same voice boomed again, closer now. "Hey! Who's here?" Hearing that echo down the stairwell flipped something in all of us. We stopped trying to be quiet. We ran. The corridor felt like it went on forever. Doors blurred past on both sides, all closed, no windows. My shoes slipped once on dust or something slick, and Alex grabbed my elbow and yanked me upright without even slowing down. None of us said a word. All I could hear was our footsteps and my own breathing getting louder and louder. Then Ethan yelled, "Here!" He'd reached a heavier metal door at the very end of the hallway, the kind with a push bar instead of a knob. He slammed into it with his shoulder. The latch screeched, and this rush of cold air hit us from outside. All I remember thinking in that second was that whoever those men were, they were way too close behind us as Ethan pushed it open, and we came out into a loading dock area with an exit to the street. We burst out onto the loading dock and just ran. Alex pointed toward the shopping center lot and yelled, "Run!" We jumped off the concrete drop and hit the ground. Behind us, a door slammed open and somebody shouted something. Footsteps pounded after us, heavy and fast across broken pavement. I glanced back and saw 3 men spill outside yelling. They wore grimy coveralls and boots, definitely not actual cops. One of them carried a bat hanging at his side. Another pointed straight at us and yelled for us, "Stop!" We cut across the vacant lot, dodging trash and holes. Martha ran ahead, screaming at us to move faster, faster. Ethan stayed close behind her, camera bouncing against his chest. Alex was in front of me, breathing loud, pushing forward. His foot hit something hidden, and he went down hard. He slid on hands, cursed, and Martha screamed at him. Alex pushed himself up without looking back and sprinting again. Their footsteps sounded closer, but I realized we were faster. The guy with the bat slowed, bent, grabbing his side. He forced himself upright again and kept coming, more slowly. We hit the edge of lot and saw the car. Ethan reached it first, yanked open door, and fumbled keys. Martha and I dove into back seat, lungs burning and shaking. Alex threw himself into passenger seat and slammed it shut. Ethan's hands shook so badly keys slipped from the ignition. He grabbed them, tried again, and got the engine roaring. He slammed the gear shift, stomped gas, and we shot forward. I twisted around and saw men standing at the curb. They'd stopped chasing and were watching us leave the lot. One pointed, yelling, while another lifted his phone and filmed. I told Ethan they had our plate, and he swore. We drove blocks in silence, everyone gripping whatever they could. Ethan pulled onto a side street and killed the engine. We sat breathing hard, listening for sirens that never came. Alex said we couldn't call police because we'd trespassed. Obviously, Ethan agreed, saying they would blame us before touching guys. Only home later did I realize Martha and Ethan missing. They usually texted arrivals, but my notifications stayed totally empty. I tried Martha first, and her phone went straight dead. Calling Ethan did the same thing, no ringing at all. My stomach dropped and I paced the apartment, thinking worst. I called Alex and asked what he remembered after running. He swore they'd driven off toward Ethan's place, together. Fine. He sounded scared, repeating that he'd seen them right behind. Later, I couldn't take it anymore and called some friends. I told Jonah and Lisa something was wrong, needed help. I admitted about the plant, and asked them to drive. We picked up Alex, and nobody talked on that ride. Back near plant, the whole area looked empty and abandoned. No trucks, no cars, just dark windows and broken docks. We parked farther away and walked in a tight group. Inside, our flashlights showed dust, trash, and nothing moving all. We yelled their names again until my throat hurt badly. We checked the first floor, the offices, the cafeteria, everything. No Martha, no Ethan, no sign of those 3 men. Following memory, we found the service stairs and headed downward. The basement hallway looked changed. Doors open were shut before. Near the end, Jonah's light caught something stacked against wall. Their backpacks, their keys, but Ethan's camera missing, gone completely. Next, we filed reports. Officers searched everything, called them missing 2 months later. Case cold. I still don't know why. I only realized what the rope was for when I saw him walking through the orchard straight toward my car. Before that, it was just an annoying breakdown. My Honda started overheating on a Thursday around 3 in the afternoon, halfway between two small towns. The temperature gauge smacked the red, a warning light flashed, and steam puffed out from under the hood. I pulled onto the shoulder next to an old fruit orchard with crooked trees and tall grass, and turned the engine off. I'm a 28-year-old architect, not a mechanic, so after staring at the mess for 10 useless seconds, I called roadside assistance. The dispatcher sounded tired and told me all their trucks were out, 2 hours minimum. I glanced at my phone. 23% battery. That bothered me more than it should have. I turned off my music, closed every app, left just the hazards blinking, and decided to save the remaining charge in case they needed to call back. A few houses sat way off in the distance, which made me feel slightly better. I told myself that if my phone died or it got dark, I could always walk over and ask to charge it, even though the idea of knocking on some stranger's door in the middle of nowhere didn't exactly thrill me. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt normal. I rolled the window down a crack, flipped through an old architecture magazine from my bag, and drank a warm Coke from the trunk. Cars passed every few minutes. Nobody slowed. The orchard on my right was quiet, just rows of trees and high grass. I kept telling myself it was fine. Broad daylight, other people around, tow truck on the way. At one point, I even opened my sketchbook and started doodling facade ideas for a project, trying to label this bonus planning time, instead of just being stuck on the side of the road. After a while, I noticed I was checking the time more than the pages. The car felt stuffy, so I stepped out, stretched my legs on the gravel, then slid back in and locked the doors. I'd barely settled when I heard the sharp squeak of bike brakes behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw a cyclist stopped on the shoulder, maybe 50 feet back. He looked mid-50s, thin, wearing a faded jacket and a dark backpack, hands resting on the handlebars while he stared straight at my car. I cracked my door just enough to lean out. "I'm okay. Thanks. Tow truck's coming," I called, trying to sound calm and not like my heart had just jumped. He didn't answer. He just gave a slow, stiff nod and stayed right there, eyes fixed on me like he was watching a screen. I eased the door shut and pretended to focus on my phone, watching him in the mirror instead. He stood there for what felt like a long time, not drinking water, not checking a map, just staring. Finally, he swung his leg over the bike and rolled past my window. As he went by, he turned his head and looked directly in. It wasn't a quick, polite glance. His eyes moved over the front seat, the back seat, then back to my face. I gave him a quick, tight smile I didn't feel. He didn't react, just kept pedaling until he disappeared around the curve, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled, checked the locks again, and told myself I was being dramatic. People can be awkward. He hadn't said or done anything actually threatening. I went back to counting cars and minutes, forcing myself not to keep checking the mirror. About 10 minutes later, I saw him again, and this time my stomach dropped before my brain caught up. He appeared from the opposite direction now, on the other side of the road, moving slower. He coasted until he was almost directly across from me, then stopped and put one foot down on the asphalt. 2 empty lanes sat between us. My hazard lights kept blinking, ticking loud in the sudden quiet. I didn't want him to think I was scared, but I also didn't want to invite conversation, so I grabbed my phone and held it to my ear. "I'm fine. Yeah. Still waiting. They said they're close." I said to no one, making sure my lips moved like I was really talking. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him unclip a water bottle, take a long drink, eyes never leaving my window. That steady stare made my skin crawl more than if he'd shouted something. Then he put the bottle back, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out a coil of rope, neat and bright, looped over his hand like he'd packed it for a reason. Every hair on my arms lifted. There's no normal reason to stand on the side of the road staring at a stranded woman and slowly take out rope. I stopped fake talking mid-sentence, tossed the phone onto my lap, and hit the lock button again, even though I heard the click already. My breath sounded too loud in the car. He watched me locking the doors, then calmly rolled the rope back into a tighter bundle and slid it into the backpack like he'd just remembered something and put it away. Without a word, he pushed off and rode away again. But instead of following the highway, he turned onto a narrow dirt track that cut into the orchard. He didn't speed up or vanish. He just disappeared between the first rows of trees, slow and deliberate, until the branches hit him. That was the first moment I really believed I might be in actual danger, not just creeped out. Either he'd loop around to come out closer to me, or he'd just stay in there watching. Both options made my hands shake. I called the tow service back and tried to keep my voice level while I gave my reference number. The woman on the line said traffic was bad, and I still had about 40 minutes. I told her there was a man circling me on a bike, that he'd just gone into the orchard with rope, and I wasn't sure if I should be worried. She went quiet, then gently suggested that if I felt threatened, I should call the police so they could send a patrol car. I stared at the trees, chewing my lip, and said the thing I half believed. He hasn't actually done anything. He's just acting strange. Even as I said it, I saw movement between the trunks, a line of branches shaking in the overgrown grass, and I understood way too late what the rope could be for if someone like him decided I was worth the effort. I let the phone slide from my ear and just listened to the operator's voice buzz in my hand while the rationalizations I'd been clinging to fell apart one by one. The cyclist had left the dirt track and was coming straight toward the road now, weaving through the orchard, stepping over fallen branches, pushing his bike beside him as he walked through the overgrowth toward my car. He was not hiding anymore, just walking straight toward me through the trees, pushing the bike like he already knew I could not escape today. Panic finally kicked in, and I turned the key even though the engine was smoking, praying it would start before he reached the car again. The engine caught with an awful grinding sound. The warning light glowed red. Steam poured out. But I threw it in drive and pressed down. I pulled onto the road with the temperature maxed out, not even checking my mirrors, just focusing on the lines and forcing the car forward. I expected the engine to die every second, but it kept dragging itself along until I saw a small sign for a residential street ahead. I turned without thinking, past a few small houses, and pulled straight into the first driveway that had a parked car and a kid's bike. When I switched the engine off, it hissed loud and then went quiet, and I realized my hands were shaking on the wheel just now. A woman walked out onto the porch almost immediately, wiping her hands on a towel, frowning like she expected trouble parked in her space today. Before she could say anything, I stepped out, apologized, and explained in breath that my car overheated and a creepy cyclist had been circling me. I told her he had stopped behind me, stared without speaking, then showed rope before disappearing into the orchard and walking toward me just now. Her face changed when I said rope. She stopped looking annoyed and started watching the end of the street like she believed something might wrong. She told me I could leave the car where it was, come sit on the porch, and use phone to call police if I wanted. We sat side by side on her steps, not really talking, both staring at the corner where the street met the main road, waiting there. Cars passed now and then, but no older man on a bike, no backpack, no rope, nothing that matched the picture in my head today. Eventually, the tow truck turned onto the street, and I realized my shoulders were hurting because I had been tensed up the entire time there. The driver loaded my Honda, listened while I told the story, and kept glancing at the homeowner like he was checking whether I sounded believable. When she backed me up, he shook his head and said there were some strange types from isolated communities around here who fixate on people. He said leaving the highway had saved me from something bad, then suggested we file a report with police once we reached the next town. At a gas station, he parked the truck, and a car met us. I gave them detail I remembered about the man and his bike. They took notes and said they would drive through the area, but a week later, an officer called to say they had found nothing there. What stays with me most is that rope and the way he pulled it out slowly, like he wanted me to understand he had plans. The tow driver mentioned other reports in the region. People alone on back roads getting approached by strangers. Nothing enough for charges, but worrying patterns. My radiator was destroyed from forcing the car like that, and the replacement cost $800, which hurt, but felt like an acceptable price. Since then, I check coolant before trips, keep power on me, avoid stopping alone in isolated spots, and wonder if he is still out there. It happened last summer when I was 23 and couldn't find work with my English Lit degree, so I took night shifts at Wendy's on Ray Road. I was renting a small one-bedroom in Chandler and working 11 at night to 7 in the morning. The money wasn't great, but it covered rent and loans if I stretched everything, and I told myself it was temporary. Our night crew was always the same. David, the shift manager my age who studied programming during the day. Angela, a worn-out 32-year-old single mom. And the twins, Marcus and Michael, 20-year-olds who argued about everything, but moved fast on the line I floated between grill and counter, trying to keep up and not look as lost as I felt. The first couple weeks were quiet in that boring, comforting way I learned how to deal with drunk regulars at 2 a.m., which fryer jammed, how hard you could slam the freezer door before the latch stuck. The dining room stayed locked, so it was just us and the drive-through headset and whatever playlist someone put on low. I was always tired but starting to relax, like okay, I can do this for a while. The only spot I didn't like was the back hallway where the big walk-in freezer was. It felt colder than the rest of the store, and the light back there flickered. And sometimes I got this stupid little knot in my stomach walking past it. I kept telling myself I was just being weird. Then, during my third week, around 3 in the morning, Marcus walked up and said, "Can you come smell the back freezer? Something's off." He said it fast and kept making a face like he was trying not to gag. He told me it didn't smell like spoiled food, more like a hospital or something. I figured a box had split or something leaked, and I didn't want David pulled away from his paperwork at 3 a.m. for rotten patties. So I told Marcus we'd check it first. We went down the hall and he yanked the heavy walk-in door open. The second we stepped inside, it hit us. It wasn't the usual cold meat smell. It was sharp and sweet and metallic at the same time, and it felt like it stuck in the back of my throat. Marcus pulled out his phone and aimed the flashlight toward the back where the extra meat boxes were stacked in a row. Something dark was jammed between 2 of the cartons. Like a lump of fabric, I thought it was maybe a rag or an apron someone had shoved back there and forgotten. We walked closer, and I saw a seam and a cuff and realized it was a sleeve. A denim jacket was folded in on itself and wedged down tight between the boxes, like someone had pushed it there in a hurry. There were stiff, dark brown stains up the arm and across the side. I didn't even want to touch it. But my fingers brushed the fabric, and it was hard, like it had been soaked in something and then frozen solid. Marcus swore under his breath, backed away and pushed past me toward the door. Suddenly, I didn't want to stand in there either. We stepped back into the hallway and let the heavy door swing shut. My heart was beating way too fast for just some old jacket. I told Marcus to stay up front, and I went straight to the tiny office where David was staring at the screen. I told him there was a bloody jacket in the back walk-in and that the whole freezer smelled wrong. David didn't say much. He just stood up, followed me down the hallway, and told Angela to keep an eye on the front. He went into the freezer alone and tugged the door mostly shut behind him. He was in there maybe 30 seconds. When he came back out, his face looked washed out under the fluorescent light. He told Marcus to lock the back door and told Angela not to let anyone into the lobby. Then he went straight back to the office. A minute later, we could hear his voice through the thin wall, low and tight, giving our address to 911. None of us really talked after that. We just kept the drive-thru moving because there wasn't anything else to do. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, 2 uniforms and a detective in a wrinkled shirt. They moved us into the dining room, taped off the back hallway, and wrapped yellow tape around the freezer handle. When they opened it, we watched them pull the jacket out into a clear evidence bag. It wasn't just the jacket. More clothes came out after it. Jeans, a t-shirt, underwear, all frozen together and stained dark. A crime scene team arrived closer to sunrise. They went in and out of the walk-in with cameras and paper bags, pulling out boxes, swabbing the walls, sealing everything in plastic. The store that had always felt like nothing but grease and boredom suddenly looked like a crime show set. They interviewed us one by one at the front tables. When it was my turn, the detective asked how often anyone went into that freezer, and when I'd last been inside, I told him we only used it when the big meat delivery came in, maybe once a week, and that I hadn't smelled anything strange until that night. He wrote it down without changing his expression. Later, I watched him talking to David again. In the middle of it, David suddenly remembered that about 2 weeks earlier, he'd come in for his shift and found the back employee door unlocked. He'd just assumed the evening crew forgot, locked it, and moved on. The detective had him repeat that and kept writing, like that little detail mattered more than anything we'd said. When they were finally done and the sun was already up, they taped a closed for investigation sign to the front doors, told us corporate and inspectors would contact us, and the restaurant stayed shut for the next 2 days while they worked the scene. About a week later, it finally showed up on the local news. I was half awake, eating cereal at my little table after a shift, when I heard the words, "Wendy's on Ray Road," from the TV. I turned the volume up and just stood there with the spoon in my hand. The anchor said the clothing found in our freezer belonged to Emily Chen, 21, a student at Arizona State University. She'd gone missing 3 weeks earlier after leaving a party in the student area in Tempe and never making it back to her dorm. They showed her picture, just a normal girl in a hoodie, smiling. Then they said hikers had found her body out in the desert, about 40 miles east of Phoenix. Cause of death was strangulation. There were signs of sexual assault. Hearing it said like that, flat and calm, made me feel sick. The reporter went on to say that detectives believed the killer had brought her clothes to our back freezer to slow down decomposition and damage evidence, maybe planning to come back for it or just thinking the cold would mess with the lab work. They said police were reviewing all the surveillance footage and interviewing anyone who had access to the rear entrance, including employees and delivery drivers. That part made my chest hurt. I started picturing every person I'd ever seen come through that door in the middle of the night. According to the segment, there were no suspects named, no arrests. They ended it with the usual tip line and moved straight into a commercial, like it was just another story between car ads. I stayed at that job because I needed the money. It wasn't some brave choice. I just didn't have another one. I worked there for 2 more months after we reopened. I was still sending out applications during the day, but nobody called rent and loan payments didn't care that there had been a murder case in my freezer. On my first night back, I made myself walk past the freezer without staring at it. The door had a new lock. The crime scene tape was gone. But I could feel myself tense up any time I had to go down that hallway. If I needed something from the storage room near it, I'd move fast and focus on whatever task I could do up front. When David asked why I was acting jumpy about the back, I just said the whole investigation had messed with my head. He nodded and stopped assigning me anything that involved the walk-in unless he had to. The rest of the crew tried to pretend things were normal, but you could see it. One night a pan hit the floor and Marcus actually yelled, then tried to laugh it off. Angela started keeping her phone in her apron with the screen up, like she was waiting for some emergency call. Michael talked more than usual, throwing out dumb jokes whenever the kitchen went quiet. Around 3 in the morning, when we normally got almost no customers, every noise felt too loud. The ice machine dumping, a timer beeping, the drive-through chime. We'd all jump a little when a car finally pulled up. By the time 7 a.m. hit, I'd feel like I'd spent the whole night bracing for something, even on slow shifts where nothing happened. Sleep stopped being a break. A couple weeks after the news story, the freezer started showing up in my dreams. In them, I'd be in the back hallway again with my hand on the metal handle, knowing what I was about to see but having to open it anyway. Except when the door swung open, it wasn't the denim jacket jammed between boxes. It was Emily, on the floor in those same clothes from the TV picture, eyes open and looking right at me. She never moved, never talked. I'd just stand there while the cold hit my face, feeling like I couldn't breathe. I'd wake up shaking, grab my phone, and see I had maybe an hour before I had to get dressed and go back to that building. After about a month of those dreams, and one night where I almost threw up just walking past the back hall at work, I broke. I went home, sat on my couch in my uniform shirt, and texted David that I was sorry, but I couldn't do overnights there anymore, and wouldn't be coming back. He called once, then texted that he got it. A week later, I was bartending at a restaurant in downtown Scottsdale. The pay was a bit worse, but there were no walk-in freezers, and the worst thing I had to deal with was drunk people and broken glass. Every so often, Emily's name shows up again in some article about unsolved cases, or on the anniversary of when they found her, with the same school photo and the same request for tips. As far as I know, they never found who killed her. The case is still open. I still think about the night someone carried her clothes through our back door like it was just another delivery and shoved them between boxes of frozen meat. And I wonder if I ever handed that person a bag of food or gave them change through the drive-through window. Sometimes I go over it in my head and tell myself that if we'd checked the freezer earlier, if we'd gone in there more often, maybe something would be different, even though the detective told me she'd been dead for days before the clothes showed up, and there was nothing I could have changed. It doesn't really help. I still see my hand on that freezer handle and think about how that stupid minimum wage job ended up being tied to the last trace of a girl my age, who never got the chance to move on from it the way I did. When I walked into my shop at 6 in the morning and saw all the storefront windows smashed, I didn't realize this was just the beginning. For a second, I honestly thought I'd pulled into the wrong unit. There was glass everywhere, the open sign hanging by one wire, cold air blowing in through the broken frames. I just stood there holding my coffee, trying to do the math in my head of how much this would cost versus what I had left in the bank. Then my brain caught up, and I called the police, my landlord contact at the fund, and my sister, in that order. 3 months earlier, everything had looked almost perfect. I was 34, finally opening my own small print shop instead of grinding for other people. I'd bought a 2-story brick building in the industrial district for my business, Print Masters. The price was low because the previous tenant had left suddenly without renewing, and the place had been empty almost a year. My sister Rita is a corporate lawyer. She checked the contract, the title, even the bankruptcy filings for the old owner. The building was held by an investment fund that had bought a whole package of properties out of that bankruptcy. On paper, everything was clean. No liens, no weird easements, no pending lawsuits. I took that as a green light and shoved basically all my savings into renovations. Paint, wiring, fixing the bathrooms, a decent front counter. I leased the presses and cutters, hired 4 employees, and set up a little desk for myself above the production floor so I could see everything. For once in my life, it felt like I had done something solid and grown up, like this was going to carry me into the next decade. Behind the building, there was a big, cracked asphalt parking lot, bigger than my tiny company really needed. The deed said the lot belonged to my parcel. But during the first week, I kept seeing trucks from neighboring businesses parked back there like it was a free public lot. One guy in a warehouse shirt waved at me and said they'd been using it forever. I didn't want to fight, but the whole reason I'd picked that building was access and parking for clients, not to babysit other people's trucks. So I decided to fence it. I ordered a basic metal barrier with a sliding gate and had the crew put posts all along the property line. When they finished, I hung a sign on the gate that said, "Parking for Printmaster's clients only," and locked it. That first night, shutting the gate felt good, like I was finally protecting something that was actually mine instead of renting a corner of someone else's place. The fence went up on a Tuesday. On Thursday morning, sitting at my office computer before opening, I noticed an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject, no signature, nothing. The whole message was just one line. "Take down the fence. Last warning." At first, I thought one of my friends was messing with me. I showed it to Rita when she dropped by later. She read it twice, frowned, then said it was probably just an annoyed neighbor venting. "If they had any sort of claim, you'd be getting a letter from a law firm, not this," she said. That sounded logical, so I tried to shrug it off. The police who came out for the smashed windows that morning were polite but clearly tired. They took photos, wrote a report, told me without cameras or witnesses, it would be hard to do anything. While my employees swept up glass and a repair company taped plastic over the frames, I sat at my desk pricing security systems. By the end of that week, I had 3 cameras mounted around the parking lot and 1 above the front door, all feeding to an online account I could check from my laptop and phone. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Orders came in, we hit our deadlines, and the new fence just became part of the routine. I started to think the broken windows had been random vandalism. Then one Monday morning, I pulled into the lot and saw huge letters spray painted across the asphalt. "Not your land." The text took up half the driving lane. One of my press operators got out of his car, looked at it, and just said, "Wow, they're serious. You can't scrub spray paint off old asphalt with a mop," so I had to call in a professional cleaning crew. They charged me $300 I really couldn't spare. But by late afternoon, the message was mostly gone. I drove home telling myself that whoever did it had had their tantrum and would move on. A few days later, I unlocked the gate and saw fresh paint. Same phrase. This time all along the metal fence panels. I went straight back inside and pulled the camera footage from the night before. Whoever did it came between 2 and 4 in the morning. Hood pulled tight, moving like they knew exactly where the cameras were. They kept their head down the whole time, and the picture went grainy every time they got close enough for details. I gave the footage to the police. The officer took another statement, then told me, pretty bluntly, that without a clear face or plate number, the case would probably go nowhere. That's when I started sleeping at the shop. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment. I just couldn't stand feeling like I was waiting at home for a phone call about more damage. I brought in a folding cot, set it up behind the main press, and started staying late to do paperwork. For about a week, the lights stayed on upstairs all night. Nothing happened. No fresh tags, no broken locks. Whoever it was must have noticed someone was inside and backed off. The next hits were quieter, but they hurt more. One afternoon, my receptionist called me over to the front computer and showed me our Google Maps page. 10 new one-star reviews had appeared within about 2 hours. Different accounts, different names, but almost the same text. We lost orders, missed deadlines, yelled at customers, refused refunds. None of it had actually happened. Reading them, my stomach dropped because I knew exactly how that looked to someone searching print shop near me. I gathered everyone in the break room and asked if any of them recognized the situations from the reviews. Nobody did, and honestly, I believed them. I flagged each review as suspicious and sent a detailed complaint to Google with screenshots and job records. Their reply was basically, "We'll look into it. This may take several weeks." In that several weeks, a couple of our regulars emailed me screenshots asking if everything was okay, and a few new clients quietly canceled orders. About a week later, a supplier forwarded an email to me. At the top, it looked exactly like something I'd written. My full name, my work address, my usual signature block, even our logo. The message itself was garbage spam with a sketchy link. I checked my sent folder. Nothing. Rita helped me look at the headers, and we realized someone had forged my address and blasted that junk to hundreds of contacts from the district business mailing list. A few hours after that, one of my biggest corporate clients called to say they were ending our agreement because of concerns about security and professionalism. That cost me a contract with a major client. An IT specialist I knew from another small business came by the shop and looked through the email headers for me. He pointed at lines I didn't really understand and said the messages had gone out from public Wi-Fi at a cafe 3 blocks away. Hearing it was that close made the whole thing feel smaller and more personal, not like some random spammer overseas. I walked over there that same afternoon, half expecting to recognize someone. But of course it was just students, guys on laptops, a couple of delivery drivers killing time. I went back to the police with a printed report from the IT guy. The officer at the desk glanced at it, nodded like he was listening, then basically shrugged. He repeated that cyber attacks were hard to trace if the person knew what they were doing, and that a public hotspot meant anyone could have sent those emails. I asked if they could at least pull security footage from the cafe, and he said they'd see what they could do, which sounded like probably nothing. That night I sat at my desk with Rita on speakerphone, going through numbers. Between the windows, the cleaning, lost contracts, and hours I'd spent fixing reviews instead of printing, the sabotage had already cost me more than $10,000, Rita said, very calm. That in situations like this, people sometimes hired a private investigator to track down whoever was behind it. I opened a few websites and saw the rates, and just closed the tabs again. I was already juggling invoices and payroll. I couldn't justify adding another big bill with no guarantee of results. So I tried the one thing that didn't cost money: talking to people. Over the next week, I made a point of checking in with every neighboring business owner I could catch. I didn't accuse anyone. I just said there had been trouble with the parking lot, and asked if they'd heard anything. If they knew anyone who might feel like they still had a claim on it. Most of them just shook their heads or made small comments about territorial types in the area. The owner of the auto repair shop across the street, an older guy named George, was the first person who gave me something solid. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, then sighed and said this had probably been building for years. According to him, about 8 years ago, the previous owner of my building had rented it to a small logistics operator. That guy, George said, had been quietly subletting the parking lot to neighboring companies for cash. No paperwork. When the building got swept into the investment fund after the bankruptcy, the fund moved to evict him for not paying. George remembered him arguing that he had an oral agreement that gave him rights to the lot. The way George told it, there had been court dates, raised voices in the parking lot, people coming and going with folders. In the end, the court sided with the fund, and the logistics guy had to leave. But before he did, he told anyone who would listen that the land was still his in principle, and that he'd been cheated out of it. George hadn't seen him for years, but he said it wouldn't surprise him if the man still considered the parking lot his. At least in his head, George didn't remember the guy's name for sure. He thought maybe it started with an M, but he wouldn't swear to it. He just knew the man had moved to a neighboring county and supposedly ran a small transport company now. That information at least gave me a motive I could understand. Someone had built a side business on space I now legally owned, lost it in court, and then watched me fence it off. It didn't give me a clean path to fix anything, though. I still didn't have a full name, an address, or anything I could take to the police that wouldn't sound like a guess. With no clear target, all I could do was make the shop harder to hit. I called the security company back and had them install motion-activated floodlights along the rear wall and near the gate. I adjusted the cameras to cover more angles and started parking my van directly across the gate every night, so even if someone cut the lock, they couldn't just drive in. The physical vandalism stopped after that. No more paint on the asphalt, no more broken glass or damaged locks. The online attacks didn't stop, though. About once a week, someone would drop another fake one-star review or send a batch of spam that looked like it came from my address. I set up alerts, filters, and backup email accounts. Every time it happened, I lost another half-day answering confused messages, sending explanations, and filing reports to get things removed. My staff saw the strain. They started double-checking every message they sent under the company name because nobody wanted to give whoever it was more ammunition. After about 2 months of that, the pattern started to slow down. A couple of weeks would go by with nothing, then one small thing, then another quiet stretch. The last big incident hit in the middle of October. I unlocked the gate one morning and saw fresh paint on the fence, smaller letters this time. "I'll be back soon." I stood there longer than I should have, just staring at it, trying to decide whether it was a real promise or the last flare from someone who was finally running out of energy. 4 months have gone by since that morning without any new attacks, but I haven't relaxed. The cameras record every hour of every day now, and I keep backup copies of my client list and every important document on separate drives I went through, and changed passwords on every account tied to the business, even ones I barely used. Rita says whoever did it probably got tired or found a new target, and maybe she's right. But every time I close the gate at night, I still feel like the conflict is just paused, not finished, and that I'm running my business on ground someone else is still angry about losing. The note scratched into the metal door said, "Your brother's not your problem anymore." But the bloody handprints on the upstairs wall told me someone made sure of that. I didn't see it with my own eyes the first time. I only know it from photos and from the way my Aunt Martha's voice would go flat whenever she talked about that day. She found the storage unit like that on a Saturday morning in August 1978, and what she discovered there destroyed whatever was left of her life. I was 16 that summer, old enough to understand this wasn't some prank or accident, but still too young to really get what it means when a person just disappears and everyone quietly starts acting like they're dead. The police were all over her building for months after that. Detectives walked through our house like we were the ones on trial, asking the same questions in slightly different ways, trying to catch Martha in some lie she didn't have. They searched the river, the ditches, the rail yard behind the industrial park. They never found a body, never charged anyone, just left my aunt with a ruined business and a hole where her brother used to be. Now I'm in my 50s, and it still bothers me how all of it hinged on choices she made in 1 week that August. So let me take you back to how it started, because the worst part wasn't the blood or the message on that door. The worst part was knowing she might have prevented all of it if she'd pushed a little harder that first night Dennis showed up at her house. It was a hot, sticky evening in early August when Dennis arrived without calling first. I remember because I was at Martha's kitchen table doing some half-finished summer homework when I heard his car in the driveway way later than anyone visited her. He came in looking like he'd slept in his clothes, shirt wrinkled, jaw dark with stubble, eyes moving past us toward the front window every few seconds, like he expected someone to pull up behind him. Martha tried to joke that he looked like he'd crawled out of a bar fight, but he didn't laugh. He just asked if they could talk in private, so she sent me to the living room, though I could still hear the low murmur of their voices through the doorway. After a while, Martha called me back in and said Dennis was going to stay at her building for a little while. She owned this 2-story storage place on the industrial side of town where she kept stock for her textile shop, and she'd fixed up a room upstairs with a bed, a little table, even a TV. Dennis asked if he could lay low there a couple of months. He never used the word hide, but that's what it was. Martha didn't ask why he couldn't just stay with friends or at a motel. She just grabbed the keys from the hook by the back door and told me to get my shoes on. We drove over together that first night. I remember Dennis sitting hunched in the passenger seat of her car, messing with his cigarette but never lighting it because Martha hated smoke. When we got to the building, she showed him where the phone was downstairs, in case of emergency, and reminded him the outer doors locked automatically at 9. Those first 2 weeks she stopped by every couple of days, always during daylight, bringing groceries, clean towels. Whatever he asked for, Dennis was polite, even grateful, but jumpy as hell, always watching the street from the upstairs window, always checking that the stairwell door was shut. He made her promise not to tell anyone in the family he was there. When she finally asked if she was in danger by letting him stay, he shook his head and said everything would be settled in a month and he'd be gone. She believed him because he was her little brother, and because turning him away felt worse than ignoring the knot in her stomach that told her something was very wrong. 3 weeks went by with complete silence from Dennis, just like he'd asked. Martha decided to stop visiting so often. She was worried her car showing up there every other day would catch the wrong person's attention if Dennis really was mixed up in something. She told herself that if the phone downstairs didn't ring, he must be fine. That Saturday, she had a rush order from a client and needed specific rolls of silk she kept in the storage unit's back racks. It was still early when she drove over, sun barely up, streets empty in the industrial strip. As she turned into the lot, she noticed right away that Dennis's car wasn't in its usual spot along the side fence. She pulled up to the front and saw the first floor entrance door standing open about 6 inches. Martha told me later that was the moment her hands started shaking, even before she went inside. She pushed the door fully open, called Dennis's name once, didn't get an answer, then started up the stairs to the second floor, telling herself he'd just left in a hurry. Maybe whatever trouble he was in had finally been dealt with, and he'd cleared out before dawn. At the top of the stairs, the door to his room was wide open. The scene inside made her grab the hallway wall to steady herself. The little table they'd brought from our basement was on its side, legs snapped off, chair splintered in 2. Cabinet doors hung crooked, dishes smashed across the floor in a mess of ceramic and glass. There were dark, dried smears on the linoleum that she understood were blood, even before she bent down and saw where it had soaked into the seams. On the wall near the bed, 2 heavy handprints slid downward in parallel, fingers spread, like someone had tried to stand up and been pulled away. Near the window there was a wide, dark stain on the floor, the center of everything. And from that point, a broken trail of brown-red marks led across the room, through the doorway, and out into the hall. A moment later, Martha followed it to the top of the stairs and saw that same trail of blood continuing down step after step toward the ground floor. Martha ran downstairs in a panic, and that was when she saw what she had missed on the way in. On the inside of the metal entrance door, Just above the handle, someone had gouged words into the paint with something sharp, probably a knife or a screwdriver. "Your brother's not your problem anymore" was carved in crooked letters, and underneath it, in fresh red spray paint that had dripped down the panel, were the words, "Don't look." She said her legs went weak. She pushed the door the rest of the way open, stepped outside into the parking lot, and just kept walking until she reached the corner gas station, because the idea of staying in that building alone, even for one more minute, made her feel like she could pass out. There was a payphone mounted on the wall by the ice machine. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the first coin and had to dig for another one. She dialed the operator, then the police, repeating the address twice because she kept stumbling over her own words. By the time the first patrol car rolled up in front of the storage building, she was standing near the air pump, arms wrapped around herself, watching the open doorway like someone might appear there at any moment. The officers tried to get her to sit down, asked if she needed an ambulance, but she kept insisting they had to go upstairs right away, that something had happened to her brother. They cleared the building first, weapons out, and then started treating it like a crime scene. More units showed up, then detectives, then the forensics crew with their boxes and cameras. On the first floor, near the base of the stairwell, they found more signs of a fight that Martha hadn't noticed when she ran past. A coil of wire lay half unwound on the concrete, sticky with dried blood and spots like it had been used to tie or drag someone. In the corner, near a ventilation grate, an officer used a pen to lift out a strip of torn shirt fabric that had been caught on the metal, the threads dark and stiff. They took samples from everything, scraped the dried blood from the stairs, cut out a square of flooring from upstairs where that big stain was. Later, the forensics guys told the detective that the blood type matched the one in Dennis's medical records. That was all they were ever able to say for sure. No fingerprints they could use, no footprints that led anywhere, nothing that tied the scene to anyone outside that room. No one in the surrounding buildings reported hearing a fight. No one reported seeing men hauling anyone out in the middle of the night. It was like whoever came for him had gone in, done what they came to do, and left without leaving anything useful behind. The lead detective, a serious guy named Harlan, took point on the case. He talked to Martha again and again over the next months, going through the same timeline over and over, trying to figure out who Dennis had crossed. He checked bank records, phone records, old associates, everything he could get his hands on. After about 6 months, he sat in Martha's kitchen with a cup of untouched coffee and told her that whoever took Dennis knew exactly what they were doing. People that professional, he said, did not leave trails unless they wanted to. It was the closest he ever came to telling her the case was going nowhere. Martha held on to the building for one more year, mostly because selling it felt like giving up on Dennis completely. But every time she drove out there to pull inventory, she had to walk past that door where the message used to be, past the stairs where they had scrubbed away her brother's blood. She started having panic attacks in the parking lot, hands frozen on the steering wheel, unable to go inside. Finally, she sold the place and moved her stock to a smaller rental closer to town, but the sale never loosened the guilt. In her mind, she had opened the door for him and then looked the other way, while someone else closed it for good. I saw that building years later, after the new owners had converted the storage units into an auto repair shop, and it still made my stomach tighten when I drove past. Martha blamed herself until the day she died, convinced that if she had just pressed Dennis harder about who he was running from and what he had done, she could have pushed him toward the police, or at least forced the issue into the open before someone else decided the outcome for him. Technically, the case file is still open, but the detective retired. The witnesses that never came forward got older, and I would bet most of the people involved are gone or living under different names. Whatever Dennis did to make those people come after him disappeared the same night he did. Sometimes I take the long way home just so I can pass that block and look at that building, now full of cars up on lifts and guys in coveralls. And I think about the blood that used to be on those walls, and about how my aunt walked into her brother's last minutes frozen in that room. The worst part, to me, is knowing he sat up in that furnished room for 3 weeks, listening to every car that slowed down out front, not knowing which one would be the one that didn't drive away. That message on the door was not just for Martha. It was a warning to the rest of us. A way of saying that whatever Dennis was mixed up in was done, and we were to leave it alone. Nobody in the family ever pushed past that, and his disappearance slid into the stack of unsolved files and stayed there. Just another man who vanished and left behind nothing except a few stains, a carved threat, and questions nobody is alive anymore to answer. When I moved to a new city for work last year, I decided to join a gym to stay in shape and meet new people. I was 26, new in a marketing job where I sat in front of a laptop for hours, and I could already feel my back complaining. There was a gym a short walk from my apartment, nothing fancy, just bright and crowded enough that it felt safe. I signed up for their evening functional group classes, thinking a fixed schedule and other people would keep me from quitting after 2 weeks. Our trainer was a guy named Danny, maybe mid-30s. Tall, muscular, tight t-shirts, that calm, I know what I'm doing voice. At first, he seemed completely professional. He explained technique, corrected form, walked around the room counting reps and giving small tips. If someone struggled, he'd swap their weight or show an easier version without making them feel stupid. He remembered my name fast, asked how the new job was going, joked that marketing people always looked the most tired. It all felt normal. After a couple of weeks, I started noticing he was around me more than around anyone else. During squats, he'd come right behind me, put his hand on my lower back, tap my hips, and tell me to open up. Even when I was already in position, I could see other people in the mirror rounding their backs or letting their knees cave in, and he'd just shout general cues at them. With me, it was always hands-on fingers on my shoulders, brushing the side of my neck when he said he was checking alignment. I told myself he was just detail-oriented, and that I shouldn't be weird about touch in a gym. He started standing very close when he talked to me. If we did partner work, he'd slide in with, "I'll take her, our heights match," before anyone else could move. He'd lean down near my ear to say, "Good, keep going," and I'd feel my whole body tense. I didn't want to make a scene or look paranoid, so I kept my answers short, focused on the exercises, and left quickly after class. In my head, I kept repeating, "If it really bothers you, just switch groups later." One night after class, I stayed a bit longer to stretch, then showered and went into the women's locker room to grab my bag. I had just zipped my hoodie when the door opened and Danny walked in, even though the men's locker room is down another hallway. He leaned against the wall like it was nothing and asked how I felt about my progress. Before I really answered, he said he'd been watching me closely and thought I had great potential. Then he offered free personal sessions. He said he usually charged extra but liked to help people who were serious and who listened. "You could get really strong with a bit of extra focus," he said. I felt awkward standing there half-packed, but also kind of flattered. I've never been athletic, and having the trainer single me out felt like a compliment. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or difficult, so I said yes. We booked a one-on-one for Saturday morning, early, when he said the gym would be quiet. The night before, I almost texted to cancel. Meeting a man alone in a half-empty gym suddenly felt different than being in a group. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, and that there would still be staff around. When I arrived, the front desk guy was there. Music was playing. A few people were on machines. It looked normal. Danny had a sheet of paper with a plan, and said we'd do an assessment. From the first set, he stood closer than in class. Our shoulders kept brushing. When he corrected my form, his hand stayed on my waist, slid down my sides when he told me to brace your core, and didn't move right away when I shifted. During glute bridges, he knelt beside me with his face way too close, pressing on my hips instead of just pointing. I kept focusing on counting reps and telling myself this was how personal training worked, but my stomach felt tight the whole time. After about an hour, he clapped his hands, said, "Great work, you pushed yourself," and asked if I wanted to grab a protein shake at the cafe next door to talk about your goals. My first reaction was just, no. I heard myself say I had errands and a call with my family, which wasn't even true. I just wanted to go home. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He went quiet for a second, then said, "Okay, another time then," and let me leave. At the next group class, he was even more focused on me. He called my name more, used me to demonstrate exercises, stood in my space while everyone watched. I noticed a couple of people giving each other looks. During the water break, a woman who usually worked out near me, Lisa, kept glancing over. When class ended and we headed to the exit with our bags, she slowed down to walk next to me. She lowered her voice and asked if Danny was training me one-on-one now. I said we'd done one session. She hesitated and then asked if I'd noticed anything strange in how he behaved with me. I paused, then decided to be honest and said yes, that lately it felt a bit off. Lisa sighed like she'd expected that answer. She told me he did this with every new attractive woman who joined Extra Attention. Free personal sessions, then messages and calls outside the gym. She said there had been another woman in our group a while back who'd suddenly stopped coming. Later, that woman told a few people that Danny had started texting her at night, commenting on her clothes, asking what she was doing. And then one day he showed up near her building, by accident. She complained to management. Danny denied everything, said she had flirted with him and misunderstood, and there were no screenshots or anything printed, so they just warned him. The woman decided she didn't want trouble and canceled her membership. Walking home after that, all the little things I'd brushed off lined up in my head in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't want to find out what he would do if I kept letting it slide. That evening I opened my laptop and wrote a short email to the gym administration, asking if they could transfer me to a different evening group with another trainer as soon as possible. I kept it vague. Just wrote that I needed a schedule change and preferred a different coach. The next day they replied, saying all current groups were full and that another trainer would only be forming a new group in a month, and they asked if I could wait. I wrote back that I could wait, but after sending that email, I closed the gym app and just stopped going. It didn't make sense to spend another month in his class when I already knew I didn't want him near me. I told the manager I was fine with the plan, then told myself I'd do workouts at home for a while. In reality, I did nothing. That whole week I kept thinking about his hands on my back and the story Lisa had told me. A week later, on Sunday evening, I was scrolling on my phone when a new message popped up on Instagram from a name I didn't recognize. It was Danny, same face he used on the gym page. He wrote something like, "Hey, haven't seen you at the gym lately, everything okay?" Then offered personal training with a discount if money was a problem. My first thought was, how did he even find my account? I had never given him my handle or followed the gym. I didn't answer him at all. I took a screenshot, blocked the account, put the phone face down, and went to brush my teeth just to do something normal. When I came back maybe 20 minutes later, there was another notification from a new account with his first name and some numbers. This time the tone was different. He wrote that he couldn't believe I blocked him, that he had done so much for me in class, that disappearing without a word was pretty ungrateful. My hands were shaking while I read it. I screenshot everything and blocked that account too. That night I decided I wasn't going to just let it slide again. Instead of only venting to friends, I opened my laptop and wrote a new email to the gym. I explained that I had already asked for a transfer, that in the meantime Danny had found my private social media and was messaging me from multiple accounts. I attached the screenshots and kept the wording very simple, because I know from work how fast companies move when something looks like a liability. I hit send, and for once didn't rewrite it 5 times. The next day, the gym didn't send an automated reply. They actually called me. The manager sounded serious, apologized, and asked if I could forward the original files and answer a few questions. She said they would talk to other members and review his behavior. Over the next week, she called twice more, asking if he had ever tried to meet me outside the gym or made comments about my body. I told her exactly what happened and didn't add anything extra. 2 weeks later, she called again and said my screenshots had been decisive. She added that 3 other women had also complained about him in the last year, but they hadn't kept proof. This time there was. She said his contract was terminated and he wouldn't be training there anymore. No public post, just a quiet, "He no longer works here." They offered me 3 free months as compensation, but I said no and told her I didn't feel safe coming back. A month later, a coworker said she joined a gym across town and showed me their page. Danny was in the photos in a different uniform. I warned her quietly and went home feeling like I'd only pushed the problem away. I wrote a review, started training at home with videos, stopped trusting personal trainers, and wonder how many women he's hurt and if anyone will stop him. It happened last summer when I was 23 and rented a cheap studio apartment in an old Victorian house divided into 4 units. The place sat near the edge of San Antonio, a little rundown but close enough to the bus line that I could get to my internship at an architecture firm. The landlady, Marilyn, was a small woman in her 70s with huge glasses and a shaky walk, but she talked like she was still running a classroom. She lived upstairs and rented the rest to students and young workers. My unit used to be the dining room, with wide wooden floors and 2 tall windows. During the walkthrough, she casually mentioned, "The last tenant, Patricia Wells, was here 7 years. Moved out 3 months ago, very suddenly." Then she changed the subject before I could ask anything. The weird stuff started almost right away. On my 3rd morning there, I woke up for work and found the front door slightly open. Just enough to see the hall. I told myself I must have forgotten to pull it shut all the way. That night I locked it, turned the deadbolt, tugged the knob twice, even said out loud, "Locked." Next morning it was cracked open again. Same angle, chain hanging loose. Nothing was missing, nothing moved, but it felt like standing next to someone breathing who wouldn't say anything. A few days later I came home and both big windows were pushed all the way up. I was sure I'd left them closed. Old houses shift, I told myself. Maybe the latches were loose. I still checked them 3 times before bed after that. Within a couple of weeks it stopped feeling like forgetfulness and started feeling like someone else's routine. Objects began showing up on my kitchen table. First it was an old-fashioned magazine, the edges curled and yellowed, with a perfume ad torn half out. I assumed maybe Marilyn had been dusting before I moved in and left it there, so I dropped it in the trash. 2 days later there was a cheap plastic hair clip sitting dead center on the table, like it had been placed there on purpose. Then an empty round perfume bottle appeared, cloudy glass, label rubbed off. I uncapped it, and there was this faint powdery smell that didn't belong to anyone I knew. That night, kicking off my shoes by the closet, I noticed 2 small white pills on the floor near the wall. I don't take anything stronger than ibuprofen, so I snapped a picture and texted it to my upstairs neighbor, Carol, who I knew was a med student. She wrote back, "Looks like Zolpidem, sleeping pills. Not mine though." When I saw her on the stairs later, I joked about starting a mystery pharmacy. She didn't smile. She lowered her voice and said she'd heard someone walking around in my place a few days earlier, heavy enough that she'd assumed I was home. I told her I'd been at the office until 9 that night. We both stood there looking at my door, neither of us saying what we were actually thinking. The next day I called a locksmith and paid to have the deadbolt changed. Marilyn complained about original hardware until I told her I'd give her a copy of the new key. After that, everything went quiet. For about 2 weeks, no doors cracked open, no random objects, no windows shoved up. I almost convinced myself I just needed to feel like I was doing something. Then a Tuesday afternoon, I came home and immediately felt the temperature difference. The living room window was all the way up again, curtains moving, screen pushed out a little at the corner. The door was still locked, deadbolt firm. Somebody had been inside with a key that didn't come from my pocket. I couldn't afford a security system, so I bought a cheap webcam online and taped it to a stack of books facing the door. It recorded on a loop to a memory card. I left for work like normal the next day, tried not to think about it, and pretended to listen in meetings. On the third day I got home, shut the door, and went straight to my laptop. I scrubbed through hours of nothing, just my empty studio and changing light. Then, at 2:01 p.m., the doorknob turned. The deadbolt was already unlocked. The door opened a few inches, then slowly all the way, and Marilyn stepped inside like she'd done it 100 times. Watching it felt stranger than if it had been a stranger. She shut the door behind her and just stood there for a second, looking around. Then she walked into the main room and started moving through my stuff. She opened the closet, slid her hands over the hanging clothes, crouched to look at the floor where I'd found the pills. She checked under the bed, opened my desk drawers, flipped through my sketchbooks. At one point, she took a folded photograph out of her cardigan pocket, stared at it for a long time, then put her hand over her mouth and started crying. She wiped her face, tucked the photo back away, opened one of the windows all the way, and left. I printed a still from the video and went upstairs. When she opened the door, I held it up and said, "Marilyn, I need to talk to you about this." Her whole face stiffened. First she denied it, said she had every right to enter in an emergency, that maybe I had given her permission and forgotten. When I told her I had the whole thing on video and I'd changed the locks before it even happened, she just sank down onto a kitchen chair and started shaking. She told me the name Patricia again, but this time she didn't call her a tenant. She called her my daughter. The rest came out in pieces. Patricia had lived in that room from her early 20s until 3 months before I moved in. Marilyn had pushed her to move out, thinking a fresh start would get her away from heroin. A week later, Patricia overdosed in the hospital. There was no suicide note, no clear timeline, just a bunch of questions about where she got the drugs and who had helped her hide them. Marilyn couldn't accept that it was over, that the last 7 years of her daughter's life had played out in a room downstairs she now walked past every day. So she kept coming back into my apartment, looking for some pattern she'd missed, trying to find hidden pills or names of dealers, and the things I'd been finding weren't random junk. They were pieces of Patricia's life she'd kept in boxes and started slipping back into the space, while she opened the windows to air the room out from the memories of tragedy. The sleeping pills, Marilyn told me, had fallen out of her pocket when she was bent into my closet. She said it fast, like she was embarrassed by that detail more than anything else. I picked the 2 pills up from the table where I'd set them and slid them back toward her. We both just stared at them for a second. I finally said, "You can't come in here anymore. I'm really sorry about what happened to your daughter, but you can't do this." My hands were shaking. She nodded over and over, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan, kept saying she hadn't meant to scare me. She just needed to understand. She just wanted to know what she'd missed. I believed her. I really did. But it didn't change the fact that I'd been living in a place she still treated like her daughter's room, not mine. For a little while after that conversation, things calmed down. No more random items on the table, no windows suddenly wide open, no doors sitting cracked when I woke up. Carol stopped mentioning footsteps on the stairs. Marilyn acted almost too normal, asking how work was going, commenting on the weather, that kind of small talk. I'd see her door slightly open and picture her inside with those boxes she'd mentioned, pulling out Patricia's magazines and perfume bottles, trying to match them to something in her memory. Every now and then she'd tell me some small story about Patricia, what she studied, how long she'd been in that apartment, how she used to complain the front windows made her feel like people could see straight into her life. I listened because it felt cruel not to, but each detail just glued me tighter to someone else's history that I hadn't signed up to carry. About a week later, I started angling for more time out of the apartment. I asked my boss if I could stay later at the office, said I wanted extra hours for the experience and the paycheck. That was true, but the real reason was I didn't want to be home much. I hung around after everyone else left, straightened sample boards, rechecked drawings. No one asked me to recheck, volunteered for boring errands. When I finally went back to the studio at night, I'd lie in bed and look at the closet and imagine Marilyn standing there with a flashlight, going through my things the way she'd gone through Patricia's. I felt bad for her, but that feeling sat right next to the cold thought that she had crossed every line without even telling me who I was sharing the room with, in her head. By the end of the month, I knew I wasn't staying. I tried to write an email, saying it was about work or commute, something simple. It sounded fake even to me, so I deleted it and just went upstairs. When she opened the door, I told her I was giving my notice, that I'd be out in a month. I didn't bring up the camera, or the video, or the pills on the floor. I just said, "It doesn't feel right for me here." She watched my face for a second, then nodded, like she already knew this was coming. "I understand," she said, and she sounded tired more than anything else. On my last day, she came down for the walkthrough. She barely looked at the walls or the floor, just handed me my full deposit back and apologized again in this soft, flat voice. A little later, through Carol, I heard she'd sold the house and moved in with her sister in another state because every room there reminded her of Patricia. After I left, life moved on in that way it does, even when something weird is still sitting in the back of your head. I got a smaller place closer to downtown, with boring beige walls and a regular landlord who sent emails instead of just appearing. For a while, any sound in the hallway made me tense. I'd double-check the locks 3-4 times before bed. It eased up eventually, but there's still this part of me that doesn't fully relax unless I know nobody else has a key I don't know about. When I think about that old Victorian now, I don't picture the big windows or the creaky floors. I picture Marilyn in the recording, walking around my room and opening things that belonged to me like she couldn't see the difference between my life and what was left of her daughter's. Sometimes I run it back in my head and wonder if I screwed it up, if there was something better I could have done. Maybe I could have offered to help box up Patricia's stuff properly, or told Marilyn she could come into the apartment with me there once, just to say goodbye in a way that wasn't sneaking. But I was 23, living alone for the first time, already stressed about money and work, and I was finding strangers' pills and old personal junk showing up around my bed and kitchen. I didn't even know Patricia was dead until that confrontation. I honestly thought she'd just moved out and left a sad landlady behind. Marilyn never said she'd lost her daughter, and I get it now. Saying it out loud makes it real in a way you can't walk back. A few months after I moved, Carol texted me again and said the new guy in my old unit was complaining about things moving around and windows open, and that was when management finally leaned on Marilyn until she agreed to sell. I hope living with her sister gave her something solid to hold on to that wasn't just old perfume bottles and magazines. I hope she found some kind of peace, and isn't still out there walking through empty rooms, looking for answers that aren't there anymore. So when I was 29, I finally saved enough to buy my first real property instead of renting. It was early March 2024, and I found a 2-story townhouse in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. I'm an architect, and I specifically wanted a townhouse because I didn't want to deal with a big yard or weekend yard work. The building was from the early 2000s and looked decent enough: fresh paint, new roof, updated kitchen. It also had a basement the previous owners used for storage, and I planned to turn it into a small workshop for model building. The real estate agent told me the owners moved abroad for work and sold the place fast, which explained the lower price. I didn't question it. The inspection didn't show anything serious, so I signed. The first 3 weeks were great. I unpacked, arranged everything the way I wanted, and settled into a routine that actually felt stable for once. About a month in, I started noticing this strange smell that only showed up in the evenings. It wasn't mold, and it wasn't sewage. More like old leftovers or sweaty laundry. I figured it was the basement since I hadn't touched the vents yet, so I made an appointment with a local plumber. Around the same time, I started hearing things down there. Not constantly, just enough that I noticed. I'd be working on my laptop in the living room and hear these dull thuds or slow creaks from below, like someone shifting a heavy box. I told myself it was the building settling or maybe a neighbor on the other side of the wall. Townhouses share everything, and sound travels weirdly. One night I woke up to something falling downstairs, a crash loud enough to jolt me upright. But when I turned the lights on and listened, everything was silent. I went down the next morning with a flashlight. The basement was still crowded with old boxes and furniture the previous owners left, and nothing seemed out of place. But the smell was stronger than before. It clung to the air in a way that made me want to get the plumber in sooner. He came 3 days later. I walked him through the basement and told him about the smell and the noises. He checked the pipes, looked inside the drain access panel, and then wandered over to the far wall where these tall metal shelves stood. They were filled with old junk I hadn't sorted yet. He pushed one of the shelves aside a little, glanced behind it, then froze. He didn't say anything at first, just looked back at me with this expression like he didn't want to be the one to explain whatever he saw. Then he stepped back and said, "You've got someone living behind your shelves. There's a mattress and trash back there. You need the police, not me." For a second, I honestly didn't believe him. It sounded ridiculous. But I walked over, pulled the shelf farther from the wall, and looked. The space behind it wasn't big, but someone had definitely been using it. There was an old air mattress on the ground, a sleeping bag, and a pile of crumpled blankets. Empty plastic water bottles, fast food bags, even a little camping burner with a used fuel canister. It wasn't dust-covered or abandoned. It looked like someone had slept there the night before. Nobody was in the basement at that moment, but everything about it made my skin go cold. I backed up without really thinking and told the plumber I'd call the police right away. He nodded, said he'd wait upstairs, and didn't go near that corner again. The police showed up in about 30 minutes. 2 officers, both trying to stay calm but clearly uneasy about the setup. They walked the basement with flashlights, photographed everything, and asked me if anything had gone missing since I moved in. I told them I hadn't noticed anything obvious. They checked all the doors and windows, trying to figure out how the intruder was getting in, and one of them pointed out that nothing seemed forced. That comment hit me harder than anything else, because it meant whoever had been living in my basement wasn't breaking in. They already knew a way inside. Then one officer stopped near the back wall, lifted his flashlight toward the ceiling, and asked if I'd ever inspected the small access panel near the joists. I hadn't even noticed it before. He pressed on the edges, looked at the seams, and said it looked like it had been opened recently. The last thing I remember before they went up to check the rest of the house was him saying they needed to find out where that panel led. Turned out there was a small window in the back basement wall at ground level that opened into a narrow passage between the townhouses. I'd honestly never noticed it because it sat behind a row of bushes outside, and from the inside it just looked like a dark square partly blocked by old shelving. The officer pushed on the frame and the whole thing shifted a little, like it had been opened dozens of times. He pointed out the rusted latch hanging loose, barely attached. All someone had to do was slide it aside with a screwdriver and push the window inward. No noise, no real effort. Hearing that made everything click in a way I hated. He didn't break in because he didn't have to. The police told me straight that I needed to install a grate and real locks on that window immediately, along with reinforcing the back door. One of them suggested I not stay there until everything was secured, and until they at least tried catching the guy. I didn't argue. I packed a bag that same afternoon and drove to a friend's apartment across town. I told him most of what happened, but even then, I left out details because saying it all out loud made me feel stupid for missing so many signs. The next morning, I called a locksmith, then a home security company, then another contractor who specialized in small window grates. For a week, my phone was constantly buzzing with photos, quotes, and confirmations. During that time, the police set up a motion-activated camera near the basement window. They didn't promise anything, but they said whoever had been living down there would probably show up again. 3 days later, they called me around noon and asked if I could come to the station. They showed me a grainy but clear enough video. A man approaching the backside of my townhouse just after midnight. He crouched by the bushes, looked around, then reached for the window like he'd done it hundreds of times. Before he even got it open completely, officers who'd been watching the feed intercepted him. They told me he was a homeless guy from a nearby area, mid-40s, with a long history of illegal entry, but no violent charges. He admitted he'd lived in that basement before I bought the place and kept coming back because he assumed no one would care or notice. Police said he'd been quiet, never tried to resist, and insisted he only needed shelter. They gave him a ticket and a warning but didn't arrest him because he hadn't damaged anything or threatened me. Hearing that mix of not dangerous and repeat trespasser didn't calm me at all. It just left me stuck between feeling sorry for him and not wanting him anywhere near my home ever again. I returned to the townhouse 10 days later, once everything was reinforced and the alarm installed. Walking back inside felt different, like the house wasn't fully mine yet. I went straight to the basement and started clearing it out. Every box the previous owners left, every scrap of fabric, every piece of old furniture, gone. I hauled everything to the curb or shoved it into my car for disposal. Then I booked a professional cleaning and disinfection crew and let them take over. When they finished, the basement finally felt like a blank space instead of something someone else had lived in without permission. Now only my tools and model building stuff are down there, neatly organized. I check the locks almost every night without meaning to. The smell is gone, the sounds too. The security system records every angle, and so far, nothing has triggered it. But sometimes, especially when I'm working late, I'll catch myself thinking about how long he might have been beneath me while I slept upstairs. How many nights he walked around down there while I thought it was the house settling. It changed the way I look at owning a place. People talk about checking the roof, checking the plumbing, checking the wiring. I check the hidden corners now, the spots people forget exist until someone else discovers them first.